G'day, mate. 40 here. If you just read one book about the United States Secret Service, read this book by a veteran Washington Post reporter who also wrote two books critical of Donald Trump. It's called Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. And this book begins with a chilling anecdote by a veteran member of the United States Secret Service who'd wanted to serve in the Secret Service since he was a young lad, about 6 years of age, when he saw the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan in 1981. And he's talking at a bar with someone from Delta Force. And he pushes the guy in Delta Force, give me your honest opinion about the Secret Service. And finally, the sergeant says, well, I feel sorry for you guys. The service has really let you down. You'll never be able to stop a real attack. Right, so the shooting of Donald Trump last Saturday is just one symptom of myriad deep and wide problems in the United States Secret Service. And so this one particular Secret Service agent, he knew how ill-equipped, out-of-date the Secret Service was. Right? He knew how many problems the Secret Service had, how underfunded it was, that it was fulfilling its zero-fail mission based not on its skills, people, training, or technology, but on dumb luck. And how long would it be before that luck ran out? The United States Secret Service, for 3 years running recently, had the lowest morale of any department in the federal government, right? It has a rigid management structure that inspires discipline while also inciting resentment and rebellion. It has high performance standard and also lower morale and lower personal conduct standards than any other federal agency. Right? So it has many leaders who look after themselves first and fail to make the necessary choices that could help increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the Secret Service. Right? It's got a budget over $2.2 billion. How did the Secret Service go from an elite, hardworking band of patriots vowing to do whatever it takes to protect future presidents in the wake of the JFK assassination to a frat boy culture of infighting, indulgence, and obsolescence? For 3 years running, the United States Secret Service had been ranked as the most hated place to work in the federal government. And now we recognize from this same reporter, a news story in the Washington Post, Secret Service said to have denied requests for more security at Trump events. Right, we don't have any evidence that the Trump team requested more Secret Service at the event where he was shot last Saturday yet. But the United States Secret Service has just continually lied to us on this score. Over and over and over again this past week, from the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, to the head of the Secret Service, to the Secret Service PR spokesman. They said, oh no, we've never had a request for resources that we've turned down. Right? But the Secret Service has repeatedly rejected requests from Trump's security detail for more manpower, more gear at events before the attempted assassination. Right? This has been going on for the past 2 years. Right? Agents charged with protecting Donald Trump requested magnetometers, more agents to screen attendees at sporting events and other large public gatherings that Trump attended, additional snipers, specialty teams at other outdoor events, and these requests were frequently turned down by the Secret Service. All right? They were lying to us all week. And not exactly an impressive performance so far by Kimberly Cheadle. And I've lined up a lot of videos.
Start with the fact that every vulnerability within physical parameter reasonability. And what I mean by that, I mean, it'd be difficult, and I'm not being facetious here, but it'd be difficult to identify all threats from Mars or the moon. Yeah, right. However, to say that, for example, an outer perimeter post or an outer perimeter building 150 yards away is not the purview of the Secret Service, there's nothing short of ludicrous and insane.
Right. And that's what the head of the U.S. Secret Service did. I mean, I'm an amateur, but it makes no sense to say the Secret Service only has responsibility for within 100 yards of the president. And then you have a different local law enforcement agency who's responsible for this building, and another law enforcement agency responsible for that building, and another law enforcement agency that's responsible for this field. Right? That makes no sense. Of course, the U.S. Secret Service will depend on cooperation from local law enforcement, But in the end, it's the United States Secret Service that has to oversee and make these decisions. And so the head of the U.S. Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, has just been absolute disgrace.
I'll give you an example. A lot of people don't realize that there are many elements of the perimeter, not only in a stationary sense, but when the motorcade is moving or the protectee is moving, that perimeter is very dynamic. It's not a nice, neat 360-degree rings of protection, inner, middle, outer perimeter. It's what's above, it's what's below. And the whole premise of that is to create as much time and distance protection where it would be assassin or someone intending to do harm, to extend that as much as possible. We need as much time to react. The best way to do that is to do a proper advance. For example, when the motorcade arrives at a, for example, when an airplane arrives at an airport and the motorcade departs, prior to the plane landing, there are elements of surveillance in the immediate area to make sure there's nothing untoward. There's resources in the sky that do that. When the protectee lands on the ground and gets into the motorcade, that basically begins a cascade of other security elements, a very proactive level under normal circumstances. For example, there's a helicopter and that precedes the motorcade by significant distances. There are supposedly, should be a drone that does the same thing, especially at the site. Well, that helicopter element or the pilot car, for example, in a motorcade and other proactive elements have done a lot of work the day before, the day of, hours before, 20 minutes before. And their whole purpose in life is to look and see, are there any vulnerabilities that have developed in the last 10 hours?
Yeah.
5 hours or the last 10 minutes. The point of that is it's not restricted to 150 yards. That's the point. It can be miles. And to say that we are only responsible for areas within a perimeter that we've defined is simply wrong, simply wrong. Secret Service is supposed to be responsible for any threat within reason, to be able, within physical reason and capacity, to be able to identify and neutralize. So that particular response is completely irresponsible and devoid of any understanding of physics and the statute.
Now, as part of the advanced work, they also, once they determined, hey, we got this building, got line of sight, if some sniper was up there, the Secret Service would necessarily place themselves or place state or local police up there with this particular mission. You keep your ass up here until the event's over, and you're going to be in radio communication with us in the event you see anything.
Absolutely.
So that would be the SOP for this, correct?
Yes, and yes, absolutely. And I can tell you from my experience, and I've had small, medium, and large venues with as many as 80,000, for example, at the advance I did for the Pope in.
Right, just ludicrous. The Secret Service agent head saying that we're not responsible for outside our particular chosen perimeter for Donald Trump's security. Completely nonsense. But Donald Trump, once again, has brought many of these problems on himself. All right, he abused the United States Secret Service when he was in office. Right, he didn't leave the United States Secret Service in better shape than when he found it. Right, so Donald Trump used about 6 times the resources of the U.S. Secret Service. All right, he would insist that they protect Trump Tower when neither Trump nor any of his family was staying there. All right, Trump was just using U.S. Secret Service often for his own venality. All right, he overwhelmed the Secret Service resources, taking care of such a large number of people. All right, far more than what Obama did. Donald Trump did not like overweight agents, right? He wanted to get overweight agents removed from their posts. I want these fat guys off my detail, Trump told advisors. How are they going to protect me and my family if they can't run down the streets? So among the better spelled, right, more articulate left-wing responses I get to many of my recent videos, I see this argument, well, Donald Trump's team, they got to choose their Secret Service detail. Well, that's not always true, right? I guarantee you that Donald Trump did not choose this fat woman who did not exactly cover herself with glory, right? When she's hiding behind Donald Trump, when the shots ring out, right? There's absolutely no security need for her to be hiding behind Donald Trump. And when you try to look this up on Google image search or just any Google search, right? Try to look for pictures of female agents hiding and ducking. So you'll see the female agents often hiding and ducking when the shots are ringing out and afterward, while you see the male agents standing up. So this is classic, all right? The female agent here is ducking, the male agents are standing up. So there's indisputable video and pictures of the sometimes poor performance put in by some of the female agents at Trump's shooting. But Google seems to be suppressing these photos of female agent incompetence. I couldn't find them via Google, all right? You put in female agents ducking during Trump's shooting or any similar search, and you won't find any relevant image results in the first 100 pictures. Well, if you put that into X, all right, it comes up right away. So I noticed that there was not one good faith mainstream media article describing failures by Trump's female agents last Saturday, right? Instead, you have all these articles decrying sexism and racism, but none of the articles will present the exact representatives of bad, inept Secret Service behavior. Right? They don't show the pictures of the female agents cowering and hiding and ducking while the male agents stand up. And so there's a typical Washington Post report. Right-wing influencers use Trump assassination attempt to attack DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, right? And I don't think anyone intelligent on the right is claiming that Trump was injured because of female Secret Service agents, right? They noted that some of the work of some of the female agents around Trump after the shooting looked shoddy, right? There was no good reason for that fat woman to hide behind Donald Trump. And Trump clearly does not want obese agents. Right? So you have all these photos of the female agents ducking. And you see the male agents after Reagan's shooting in 1981, right? They look much more efficient and effective and quick than many of the female agents during Trump's shooting. So here's the New York Times. After Trump assassination attempt, Wright points finger at female agents. The rush by conservatives to pin blame for the shooting on women in the protective detail reflects a broader opposition among Republicans to diversity efforts in hiring. I don't think any intelligent right-winger is trying to pin the blame for the shooting on female agents. It's just that the inept response by female agents is really hard to deny if you're just an honest seeker of truth.
You need pipe hitters that can flip the switch to violence in a heartbeat. Pipe hitters tend to be males, not females. And that's what you need around your president. Do your capabilities match your courage, right? Because if you don't have the courage that matches, if both of those things aren't equal, then you'll find yourself in a world of hesitation and get yourself killed or get other people killed, right?
So this guy, Clint Emerson, also makes a lot of ridiculous points. I think he just made a good point there, but he wants our tax system changed so that you can direct your taxes just to those areas of the federal government that you want to support. So like all of us, right, he has some good ideas and a lot of really stupid ideas.
100% defense, right? I mean, everything they do is defensive. And that's just how it is in the PSD world, right? You wait for something to happen and then you respond as quickly and as methodically as possible based on your protocols. And so at the end of the day, they are always at the disadvantage, and it's on them plus technology. And then they have this whole department called glass and steel, right? Their glass and steel folks are the ones for putting up, bulletproof glass on a podium, for example. Steel would be the vehicles, and then they've got a lot of other tools in their arsenal that they can bring to bear, but the candidates don't typically get that. That's usually reserved for the president. So I think there's a lot of I think they're going to end up, with this investigation, and when you go through and assess everything, there's probably going to be some changes. And the big piece for me was, where were the drones that day? The Secret Service drones, the law enforcement drones, the hired security force drone. Where is the drones? Like, they're not, you and I can buy a drone and check out the area and ensure that there's nothing going on that's, suspicious, or some guy's creeping up to a building and then climbing up the side of it and then crawling across the top of it. All of that, a drone would have detected in a heartbeat. But going back to the female leadership and, increasing Secret Service female employment by 30% so that we've seen it. I think I just feel like you need pipe hitters around the leader of the free world.
I agree. I think too many people tend to believe, and this is a direct result of the feminist movement, that just because a woman can't necessarily do the same job a man can do, that she's inferior. And I don't believe that. As far as human worth goes, women bring so much to the table, so much to the equation. We need women in society and culture, but we don't need them in these roles. That's the reality of it. And I would even suggest, and maybe you disagree with me, we don't need them in combat roles. Supportive roles, sure, absolutely. I think there's incredible women who are incredibly nurturing, incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. Do I need them breaking down doors in some foreign conflict? Of course not.
Yeah.
I think only a degenerate, weak, pacified society would even argue that case.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think women have a place in everything in our lives, obviously. And it's nothing against women. It's bringing the best possible performing, highest quality person for the job, right? And if your job is to drag a 200-pound plus man to safety.
Right. So social cohesion and social trust should also play a role here above and beyond strictly efficiency. Right. So liberalism has a very individualist perspective. So what is best for the individual? But post-liberalism, as embodied perhaps by J.D. Vance, is more focused on what's in the interest of the nation and the community. Right. We need to be able to build up our trust and our cohesion and our effectiveness with each other. And so a security team that's all male, right, it's more likely to be cohesive, right? Because you're not going to be trying to score or to be distracted, right, by female sexual tension or just the different ways that you have to speak when females are around. So the more you have in common with a tight insular in-group, all right, the more likely you are to have high social trust and high social cohesion. So even if female agents were every bit as effective as male agents, there are still strong arguments for all male teams because you'll have less tension, right? You'll be able to communicate more effectively. People will be more at ease with each other.
It probably is going to take another man of that size and strength to do it, you know? So the standards of what the best is, what is the best for the president, and then hire based on that, not hire because we need to fit a certain percentage of different people and demographics into an agency. It's, hey, it's the president of the United States. Now, what does it take to protect him the best we can, right? And there's variables. Then you make sure all of those variables are matched by the people and the technology you put around him. And I think if you worked it backwards.
So unfortunately, Donald Trump did not have a proud record when he was president of the United States and how he treated the Secret Service. I'm reading from the book Zero Fail, which came out in 2021. The level of protection provided for Trump Tower when neither Donald Trump nor his family were there, right, wasted millions and millions of dollars and manpower that the Secret Service could ill afford. Right, the burden of shielding a skyscraper where the president almost never stayed only compounded as the bills kept rolling in for the glitzy places that Trump was frequently visiting instead. Donald Trump, through the campaign, criticized Barack Obama for playing so much golf, but Trump played far more golf. And then when that would get called out by the media and the amount of money that it would cost for the Secret Service to protect Trump's golf outings, then the Trump administration tried to lie and deceive and to arrange the appearance of meetings at these various golf courses so that they sounded as though Trump was doing work. We on the right laugh at Joe Biden for only working from 10 to 4, but that was approximately Donald Trump's work schedule as well, right? He had enormous amount of time blocked off as executive time just so he could watch TV or go golfing, right? Democrats in Congress began demanding investigations of Trump's travel costs, the burden it placed on the Secret Service. Trump had a close relationship with agents in his detail, but he, like other presidents, wanted to choose people to run the Secret Service that he had a personal relationship with and look good, right? Biden did this, Trump did this, Obama did this, right? Trump's chief of staff, General Kelly, tried to recommend fewer trips, explaining to Trump that this travel was forcing the Secret Service to cut back on other parts of its work. Trump's only response was, just work it out, okay. Camp David was a 40-minute helicopter ride away. It would eliminate the need for most of the Secret Service officers and agents to fly in and stand guard, but Trump found Camp David boring. So Democrats pointed out to the head of the Secret Service all the ways that President Trump was shortchanging his agents and their zero-fail mission. Right? Trump did nothing or very little effectively to whip the Secret Service into shape. Right? The degree of burnout from Trump's travels, right, caused the Secret Service to lose employees faster than it could hire them. Right? The United States Secret Service spent about $30 million to protect Trump Tower, where neither the president nor his family lived. Right? The Secret Service was going broke protecting Donald Trump. right? Its financial problems could be attributed directly to the Trump administration, specifically to President Trump, who made decisions about the Secret Service without any concern for costs or consequences, right? In his first 8 months as president, Donald Trump forced the Secret Service to shepherd him on his trips to his resorts for golf trips. On 26 out of 30 weekends, his family members made 650 out-of-town trips, right? So the United States Secret Service worked 12 times as many trips with Trump and his family as they had with Obama and his family. All right, Trump never took any notice of alarming bipartisan reports warning that Secret Service was an agency in crisis, in desperate need of new blood to replace leadership that had grown stale. He didn't heed the warnings that the Secret Service would continue to suffer and falter. Thus, the next administration ponied up hundreds of millions of additional dollars every year to add 280 more agents to replace its outdated technology and to revive its moribund training programs. So if Trump's rally had inadequate security on Saturday, right, part of that could be blamed on decisions made in the Trump administration. For the final year of his presidency, Donald Trump requested a less than 1% increase in funds for the service. The Secret Service promotion system was corrupt. It was basically based upon who liked you rather than how good you were. There were few incentives for bosses to make tough choices or long-term planning. There was rapid turnover as people just burned out. It was often named the worst place in the federal government to work. Right. Trump saw the larger Secret Service as he did any other federal agency, another tool at his disposal, one that could help him achieve his personal and political goals. Trump was never much interested in the boring work of government. He didn't do anything to ensure the agency's long-term health. Instead, the employees of the Secret Service took a major hit for Trump rather than get the boost of money that the previous administration, the Obama administration, members of Congress had pledged. The Secret Service was stuck on the same hamster wheel, its staff racing to keep up with Trump's jaunts, its agents waiting months to get paid for their overtime, its essential security repairs delayed yet again. Trump was dragging the Secret Service back and forth to his properties for his rounds of golf. They were pawns in a larger pattern with a lucrative payoff for Donald Trump. His travel forced the Secret Service, the Defense Department, and other federal agencies to take money out of their pockets to support the president's trips, and they handed over a significant portion of that to the Trump organization. All right, Trump was vacuuming up the money, not just of the Secret Service and other federal agencies that secured his trips, but for scores of Republican politicians, corporate VIPs, special interest lobbyists, foreign delegations, all of whom flocked to following him, seeking an audience to curry his favor. Now, on the other hand, I think this book by a Washington Post reporter makes some questionable criticisms of Donald Trump. So apparently many of the black officers were angered by a suggestion by a white officer that the Secret Service use fire hoses to keep protesters away from the White House and to reduce the risk of a breach. And the black employees hated that idea and said there's no legal justification for ever using high-pressure hoses on American civilians exercising their First Amendment right to protest. All right, this idea, all right, that invading the White House is just part of your First Amendment right to protest is absurd. History informs us that such tactics were used during the Civil Rights Movement to terrorize, abuse, and intimidate African Americans. All right. It doesn't sound here like racial diversity is a strength of the Secret Service. All right. There's no First Amendment right to invade the White House. And if using water hoses keeps invaders at bay, that might be a good idea, even if water hoses at some previous point in time were not used correctly. Is there any security method to deter criminal behavior that at some time is not being used incorrectly? So we should stop using valid methods of crowd control if they hurt the feelings of certain segments, certain aggrieved parts of the Secret Service. So many black staffers would accuse the agency of racism, right? The more races you have, the more likely you are to have accusations of racism. And of course, what constitutes racism is entirely subjective. So why do we encourage invocations of a non-existent moral category? And the idea that the job of the Secret Service is to protect the civil rights of protesters is absurd, right? That's another criticism that I think this book gets wrong. So it talks about a black woman who is interrupting one of Donald Trump's speeches. And so various members of the crowd yank her out of there, right? You don't have a First Amendment right to interrupt someone else's speech, right? And this book says, oh my God, why weren't there any Secret Service agents trying to protect this woman's First Amendment rights to interrupt Donald Trump's speech? Well, there isn't a First Amendment right to protect speech, and that's not the job of the Secret Service, right? The job of the Secret Service is to protect the president.
One, that's not discrimination, right? That's just facts that you're adhering to and requirements that you're adhering to. And the odds are it's going to be a bunch of linebackers that can carry a 200-pound man to the safety of a vehicle or whatever the incident is. You know, it's not rocket science. And it used to be the standard. It used to be okay. But as we've seen the last couple of years, it's become strange that different minorities of our population have the biggest bullhorn. And the majority have to sit here and go, wow, I guess we got to go with this? We just have to roll with this? Like, what happened to majority rules? It just doesn't exist, which is the foundation of democracy. So if the majority doesn't rule, then where's the democracy at?
Yeah, I mean, the only issue I take with what you said is I think it is discrimination, you know, and I don't actually think discrimination is a bad thing. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with discriminating, excuse me. You know, when I have a job that needs to be completed, I'm going to exercise some level of discrimination to find the best person possible. Now, I'm not going to discriminate on immutable characteristics like skin color, hair color, sexual orientation, female, male. I'm going to discriminate based on, to your point, what is required of the job. People have a negative connotation of discrimination, and also the word judgment, which is another one, especially in Christian circles. We shouldn't judge.
Okay, here overall is the best single video that I've seen.
Everything that happened during the Donald Trump attempted assassination shooting that all of us by now have seen. And we're going to look at it and study all of the videos. We're going to show you videos that you've seen.
Take a look at what happened.
During our analysis, we're going to study the events that led up to the shooting and what happened before and then during and then what happened afterwards, and assess what possibly went wrong and what could have been done better, and what do we think that they'll be making improvements later in the future. So 5 days before, the Secret Service scopes.
All right, this is by Jeff Ostroff, Ostroff, the best single video I've seen to date of its kind.
Out the empty Butler Farms site. So here is that area in question right here, the fairgrounds. And what they did was the Secret Service was going to fence in this entire area here and make this the enclosed area under security where they have full control. They identified this building as a threat and had asked the local police give some sort of protection over here. And now they're pointing fingers at each other, but the local police were saying, hey, we didn't have any manpower other than basic traffic control.
They were looking at assignments or ready to divvy up assignments, and our police department indicated that the manpower that they had necessary was not adequate for any assignment other than the traffic assignment that they intended to do.
So when you zoom into it here, this is where the stage was, and Trump was speaking probably somewhere right around here. And the gunman was going to be right over here on this part of the roof, right where the arrow is, approximately in that spot. And believe it or not, folks, as we're going to find out later, believe it or not, folks, right here on the second floor of this building is where there were snipers. The police had snipers in there. And how nobody saw him crawling up on this roof. He probably crawled up from the back right up here. But how nobody saw him shimmying when people on the ground saw him is going to be the subject of much debate. Now, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks learns of this Trump rally that's taking place on July 13th. He learns about it on...
All right, let's get an overview on the assassination and the media here from Howard Kurtz.
There was a moment when the shock of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump 48 hours earlier had not worn off, when the calls for national unity clashed with the finger-pointing over inflammatory rhetoric, when we got our first glimpse of the former president of the United States, his ear bandaged where the gunman's bullet came within millimeters of taking his life.
He will be the next president of the United States.
It was an electric scene at the Republican convention in Milwaukee, which was also excited over Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, who was battling largely negative commentary from the press. Journalists constantly recycled the Ohio senator's blistering criticism from 2016 when he denigrated Trump, and Vance hit back at the media establishment.
You texted a friend that Trump is a cynical a-hole like Nixon who wouldn't be that bad and might even prove useful, and that he's America's Hitler.
I bought into the media's lies and distortions. I bought into this idea that somehow he was going to be so different, a terrible threat to democracy. It was a joke.
President Biden, who called Trump the night of the shooting, used a rare Oval Office address to appeal for a lowering of the temperature.
There's no place in America for this kind of violence, for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized.
On that, even media partisans can agree. But Biden, while battling COVID, is also trying to beat back an increasingly loud campaign of leaks as top Democrats Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi let it be known they're trying to pressure him out of the race. All this while the convention spotlighted a Republican Party more unified than ever behind Donald Trump. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
I started to, like this, turn to my right and was ready to begin a little bit further turn, which I'm very lucky I didn't do, when I heard a loud whizzing sound and felt something hit me really, really hard on my right ear. There was blood pouring everywhere, and yet, in a certain way, I felt very safe because I had God on my side.
But the real thing was the emotion. What it showed was that this man, this extraordinary man, after those extraordinary events on Saturday, has got the Republican Party 100% behind him.
This was about lulling you into thinking that somehow this man has changed. He has not. He still wants to be a dictator on day one.
Not only did he survive an attempt on his life, not only did he put his fist up, get to Milwaukee, and give a 90-minute speech as long as that, he displayed a side of grace.
Oh, my God, it was flabby and windy and flat. 92 minutes? Somewhere in hell, Fidel Castro is jealous.
I think President Trump has seemed more emotional than we've ever seen him in the years and covering him this week, certainly. But from there, he quickly went off script.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Robbie Suave, senior editor, speech, which ended after midnight.
Right, which isn't surprising because the media is often very critical of the remarks that Donald Trump makes. I found it to be, yes, like you said, gripping. The first part of it, we were all paying very close attention. Then it was much like he is at his rallies, going off the script, talking about the issues that are important to him, that he thinks are important to the base, how Democrats have ruined the country in his view. And his audience, his supporters love that kind of performance. So I was not surprised that he did it. I think it's clear that he's trying to make a contrast between Joe Biden, who can't be even expected to get through like a single sentence at this point. He wanted to show that he can talk for 90 minutes. And
well, he did show that.
And his supporters love it. So, like, did the media want to go to bed or something? Like, it's his big moment. I mean, I wanted to go to bed, but that was what he was going to do. So I found the criticism very strange.
Molly, you were in.
Okay. So much to talk about. But one thing is there are seasons in a man's life. So if you know successful men in their 70s and their 80s, you'll recognize many Trumpian and Biden-like qualities, right? They don't tend to have a terribly open mind to other people's suggestions, let alone criticisms. They tend to want to bask in praise, right? They seem much more needy of admiration than when they were younger and building something. So that's my experience of most men in their 70s and 80s who are highly accomplished, all right? They generally don't like to be questioned. They want to be praised. If they have an enviable track record, then they expect a great deal of deference, as opposed to, say, men between 22 and 40 who are almost single-mindedly focused on building their kingdom. Then after about age 40, they start creating more and more space in their life for other people, for their family, usually to begin with. and then to communal concerns or maybe national concerns or to doing charity. The natural male inclination, particularly for the first 40 or 50 years of your life, is to only pay attention to those people who are above you in social status, right, as you're striving to build your own kingdom. But when you're talking about a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden, right, these are men who feel like they've already built their kingdom, that they have an incredible track record, and so they demand essentially a great deal of deference, and they're not particularly open to listening to criticism. And they have what seems like just an inordinate need for praise.
July 3rd, so he's got about 10 days to plan for it. While still in high school, he appeared in this BlackRock video as an advertisement. Slowed it down for you. On July 17th, in front of Congress, FBI Deputy Director Paul Abate was giving an update, and he told them that on July 6th, the shooter did a Google search for where will Trump speak from on Saturday the 13th. He shows up at the Clairton Sportsman's Club on July 12th, the day before the shooting, to do some practice shooting. He had actually tried to join the rifle club in high school, but apparently his classmates said he was a terrible shot. So he must have gotten a little bit better since then. So now it is July 13th, the day of the shooting, and the shooter, first thing he does is he goes to a Home Depot early in the morning to buy a 5-foot ladder. And I believe it was the Home Depot that wasn't far away. And you know me, folks, I know my home.
So the mainstream media is issuing a lot of critiques of social media, in particular X, for publishing disinformation. But what I was covering when I was trying to get up to speed over the past week on the Trump assassination, I found X particularly useful. And I love it that social media companies are not cracking down on conspiracy theories. So if you're getting a lot of crap in your feed, that's because of the people you follow. So there were probably half a dozen people that I stopped following due to the ridiculous nature of their X posts in the wake of the Trump shooting. But overall, I think I got pretty high quality content from both X and the New York Times and the mainstream media. I like being able to hear the different conspiracy theories. All right, there is a place for careful, considered discourse, such as what you get in the New York Times, but there's also an important place for the visceral reactions. And I think most of the conspiracy theories are absolute bunk. And you know, I don't buy into a single major conspiracy theory, but I am open to the idea that the Biden administration's reduced allocation of resources for Trump's security may not have just been purely incompetence. There may be persons somewhere in the Biden administration chain who are happy to see Trump get murdered. So that's the most obvious explanation, at least for my mind. I don't hold that that's how it's going to turn out once we get more information. But right now, the level of incompetence on the part of the United States Secret Service is at such a grotesque level that the mind just boggles. And you start thinking, my God, it's more likely malevolence rather than just incompetence.
Always super clear you're actually being shot at, for one. It's also definitely not very clear where you're being shot at from. And most people's reaction that are not used to being shot at is like, hey, what's going on? What is that noise? Right? And then sometimes it's too late. Whereas trained personnel who have been actively shot at, who have been in gunfights, who have been in shootings, they will respond a little bit differently. You'll see Secret Service rush up on the stage. All right. Trump goes down behind the podium. Secret Service rushes up onto the stage. And I'll say this, whenever you're running a security detail, right, the first thing that we start with is what we call protective intelligence. And that's before the mission even starts. And you're building protective intelligence of the area, of potential threatening personnel in the area, targets that are being investigated or watched by the FBI or whatever other organization. You build protective intelligence for potential advantage points, attack sites, etc. And then you go and do an advance, generally speaking. Now, I will tell you right now, inside information, there was not an advance done on those outer buildings due to personnel, financial, and time constraints. The agency, and this is where fault takes. Look, people, actions have consequences. And when you start dumbing down our military, dumbing down our law enforcement, creating the diversity hiring standards, pulling funding, cutting budgets, These all have consequences. And the fact of the matter is, the Trump detail did.
And Trump bears a great deal of responsibility. The lack of adequate funding and adequate leadership on the part of the U.S. Secret Service, right? Trump was not above average with regard to improving the Secret Service compared to his predecessors, Obama and George W. Bush and Bill Clinton.
Did request additional help, not specifically even for this event, but have been. And they were denied, not out of spite, not out of we want to see Trump go down, out of financial and personnel restrictions. All right. Unfortunately, Trump is not in the line of succession right now. So the majority of the resources of Secret Service go to those who are in the succession of the presidency, the current president, the vice president, et cetera, et cetera. Now, people are saying, oh, they didn't have enough support and they denied support for this event. Actually, they requested additional support and they were given that by the Secret Service. This is the first time, and again, this is inside information. This is the first time that the Trump detail actually had 2 counter sniper teams because they knew his movement, his visibility, his profile has been increasing. And this is the first time they actually supported him with 2, not just 1 counter sniper team. And I will tell you this, with what we're about to get into, it paid off and probably saved his life. The other thing was some of the agents that you see responding to the event, not necessarily this initial, the protective circle that they form around him immediately to body bunker him, right? They're all wearing body armor. They're going to jump on his body to potentially take rounds if there's another shooter or if that guy follows up. But everyone's hammering this woman who does not look like the pinnacle of fitness and in the best shape, does not look the most trained or squared away, is a Secret Service agent. And you know what? Not shame on her, but shame on the agency for the hiring standards and the fitness standards and the training standards. But she was not part of Trump's detail. She was actually an augmentee being supported. So they were giving extra support for this visit. So they body bunker around Trump. They're hunkering down right now. More agents are coming up.
So I don't know if you watched the final of Euro 2024, but you had a contrast between Spain and England. Spain played like a team, right? Spain dominated possession. They were familiar with each other. They played together. They had amazing chemistry, camaraderie. Their passes were sharp. And England, right, played like they just met that day. And so too with the United States Secret Service reaction and operation at this Trump rally, right? They operated as though they just met that day. They didn't seem to have much training together.
They're on the comms. People are screaming and freaking out. People are looking around. It is kind of a slow, and I'll say this, you know, it's a little bit of a slow evacuation, but they're also hunkered down right now. To get off the stage, they would have to stand up and expose Trump. So right now, they've got him down on the ground. They're hunkering around him. They're waiting for comms. There are, from what I was told, again, inside source, there are only 2 Secret Service CAT team members there, counter assault team. So the 2 guys you see that run up in stage in black, full kitted out, those are Secret Service counter assault team members. They're not usually assigned, but they were assigned for this. And again, not more due to financial and manpower issues. And then you'll see some guys in multicam kit. And from what I was told, that is the Pennsylvania State Police SWAT team, which, as I know, is a full-time team and quite squared away. And I'll tell you this, the Secret Service folks that I've worked with are very squared away. The uniform division of the Secret Service, that's the guys you see kitted out in tactical gear, uniform division. That's their dog handlers, their counter assault team members, their emergency response team members, and their counter snipers. I've worked with all of those guys fairly closely. They are squared away. They are hitters. Just like if you go to a police department, you see all these overweight, out of shape patrol officers, but you go to the SWAT team, those guys are the cream of that crop, right? These are guys that hold their standard, themselves to a higher standard, both in fitness. You can hear Lily Pad underneath me scratching her neck. So you'll see the detail member.
Right. You can sense when someone holds themselves to a higher standard. Usually more successful people in life, more conscientious people in life, more heroic people in life, those exhibiting obvious leader tendencies simply hold themselves to a higher standard.
Members hunkering down, creating that protective circle, that body bunker around Trump. Hold when you're ready, on you. Up, move. State Police. I know when I was a SWAT guy, no less than 7 months ago, because I just left and just retired, we could pick the channel and be on the same comms as we had it called state interoperable. And we could be on comms with state police, and we could be on comms with any other federal agencies that were coming down to support us or that we were supporting. So there was a breakdown in comms for sure. But what really led up to this? What really led up to this is years of our culture of law enforcement just getting dumbed down and dumbed down and dumbed down. Poor hiring practices to make it.
Right. Different organizations have different culture. And it's the culture that creates a passion for excellence or a descent into mediocrity. All right. The natural tendency for organizations and communities is to descend into chaos, to entropy. So you need excellence. And to achieve excellence, you need usually a masculine culture that rewards excellence and gets rid of mediocrity. And a diversity, equity, inclusion culture is not one that's going to produce excellence. A highly nurturing feminine culture is not going to produce excellence in the United States Secret Service or in the armed forces.
Equal rather than finding the best candidate for the job. Financial and budgetary cuts so these guys don't have the proper training, manpower, personnel, equipment, etc.
Right. If agents have to wait 3 months, 6 months to get paid overtime, right? Some of them have to work 100 hours a week. That's damaging to morale. And Trump did nothing to remedy this problem when he was in office.
If there were more manpower, they should have come out and done an advance on this and all of those buildings. Way in advance. They should have had at least a liaison with Secret Service Uniform Division with those SWAT guys.
But it's not just budget, all right? It's culture, because even if they were on demand, all right, a competent team would have put someone on the roof where Crooks launched his shots.
In and around that building. When they say, hey, that building was not in the Secret Service's purview, what they mean by that is that area, any personnel in that area, even all those people that were on the news watching him climb onto the building that were over there, that was outside where the magnetometer is used for Secret Service to get people inside the venue. So that was up to local law enforcement to patrol and secure. If you know me, if you've watched any of my stuff, I can be the biggest supporter of law enforcement.
Great. Good to know.
And Secretary Mayorkas is demanding now, with a separate investigation that the president called for, he is going to be drilling down into how did this happen? What were the gaps? Why was such an obvious risk, one we've known about for more than half a century, not addressed?
Yeah, and in fact, the secretary is going to be at the White House in the briefing room a little later on, so maybe we'll get some more details from him. But Carol, I want to play for you.
Right, so she's the author of the best single book on the Secret Service, Zero Fail, and she's been an impressive reporter on the topic for more than a decade for the Washington Post.
Obviously, a lot of reporting there on scene. Just one interview with someone who was outside that perimeter near the building where the shooter fired from. Take a listen.
No, there was no security on this side at all.
Are you shocked you're this close to the president that there was no security?
I kept asking her. Thinking about it now, yes.
So we know that the Secret Service works with state officials, local authorities to fill in some of those gaps that you talk about. But ultimately, however many other law
Stephen J. James says we're lucky that the Secret Service team was all white, or none of this criticism would even be possible. Fat white women within the Overton window. Good point, Stephen James.
Enforcement members are on the scene, whatever they're tasked with. Does the buck, Carol, always stop with the Secret Service for their protectees?
Absolutely, it stops with the Secret Service. They craft, for every event, they craft a game day plan for the entire site and also the outer perimeter. They do that in coordination with the local police. And, you know, it's one thing for local police maybe to not have been well trained for a very specific tactical mission, like being counter snipers. There were local police who were doing some of the counter sniper work here. Ultimately, a Secret Service agent who is an expert marksman is the person who took out the shooter and the suspected gunman. But It is very normal for local police to be the entity that is protecting the outer perimeter, looking for trouble, looking for suspicious behavior, trying to spot anything that looks like a potential breach in the making, or even something as dramatic as an attack. And there is a way that they are instructed to communicate with the Secret Service about what they spot. But in this case, it doesn't appear that those communications happened quickly enough, and we don't know all the answers, but the Secret Service.
All right, here's an excellent thread debunking most of the bizarre and unfactual conspiracy theories regarding the shooting, including Bill Ackman, the billionaire, was promoting one ridiculous conspiracy theory. So this is Oliver Alexander. Analysis of footage from the Trump assassination attempt shows that Trump and David Dutch were hit in Crooks's initial 3-shot volley. Corey Comparatori and James Copenhaver were struck by Crooks's follow-up volley a few seconds later. So Crooks got off between 5 and 8 shots. All right, the wide angle recorded by the Right Side Broadcasting News shows the entire event unfold, shows all 3 bystanders get struck by Crooks' initial bullets.
Rally.
Let's get this shooting.
Then, if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Right, the first round fired by Crooks hits the railing visible in the video quoted here, causing a puff of smoke after grazing Donald Trump. So here we go.
Want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Immediately after this, Crooks fires 2 additional rounds, which narrowly miss Donald Trump and strike David Dutch. He's seen reacting to being hit by turning and falling to the ground. After a short pause, Crooks fires off a second, longer, more uncontrolled volley of rounds. These rounds are further off target. The first of them strikes Corey Comparatori and James Copenhaver. Corey Comparatori was struck in the head by the first round of this volley. He can be seen in the video below standing up against the railing prior to being hit. As he is hit, it also appears that the cap he was wearing flies off. Immediately following this, James Copenhaver was also hit. He reacts to being shot by grabbing the rear railing and falling to his knees. As a bonus, this angle also shows there was no one in the water tower during the shooting. Shows that the red hat guy who was instrumental to the second shooter theory peeks up uninjured after the first volley before ducking once again. The second volley starts.
That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Okay, all shots were taken from the same location, consistent with Crooks's known location. In the video, we also hear the first and second counter sniper shots. The first right at the end of Crooks's second volley, bringing it to an end, and the second a few seconds later. Had the counter snipers not fired when they did, Crooks's second volley would have likely continued for longer, potentially injuring and killing even more people. So zoomed in video shows each of the 3 bystanders get hit by Crooks's rounds. The water tower can also be further dismissed as the large screen on the northern grandstand completely blocks the line of sight between the water tower and Donald Trump. Top railing of the southern bleacher is directly in line with the shot coming from Crooks's location and grazing Trump's ear as he stood on stage. More detailed view from the water tower with the bleacher added in as a visualization. I've modeled the bleachers and stage. Here's a view from Crooks's location. Shows that the shots fired at Trump's head in the first volley are in line with Dutch's abdomen, and in the second volley, Compatory and Copenhagen were in line. The rounds hit the bleacher, and the one that hit David Dutch struck at approximately 10 feet 6 inches off the ground. Trump on the stage would have his head at around 11 feet off the ground, giving the height of the stage. This matches with the trajectory from Crooks's location. The roof that Crooks was on was 16 feet 5 inches tall. The round hitting the railing at approximately 10 feet 6 inches at a distance of 540 feet from Crooks's firing location. That puts the angle at around negative 0.637 degrees or 1.11 slope, almost a flat shot with a very slight downward angle. As for the PhD in neurotoxicology's audio analysis, it is heavily flawed as it relies on recordings from the moving microphones. The wide-angle video shows that all initial gunshots prior to the counter snipers sound exactly the same. As the water tower theory still somehow exists, it was not possible to fire at Donald Trump while he was on stage from the water tower without having to shoot through the large screen present behind the northern bleacher. Many people have mentioned the second-story window as a potential shooter location. The second shooter theory does not make sense for any of the rounds. None of the three initial shots would be possible from here given their impact location and proximity to Trump. If the shooting happened from this location, it would also require what may be the worst shooter in history, as we're looking at an approximate 350 MOA spread on the rounds fired at Trump. I don't know what that means. We know the location of 3 counter sniper teams. There are reports of a 4th inside the building that Crooks was on the roof of. I believe the first law enforcement shot was from the U.S. Secret Service counter sniper team on the southern barn 6 seconds after Crooks's first shot at the end of his second volley. Second law enforcement shot came approximately 16 seconds after Crooks opened fire. It can be heard coming from a great distance, approximately 1,000 feet from Crooks's location. Okay, that's a pretty darn good overview. All right, just some ridiculous conspiracy theories, including ones pushed out here by Stephen Gardner. I think you can just look at this guy and see that he's unreliable.
Did you hear the people just chanting, "We love you, Trump"? Like, they were so concerned for their president. They were so concerned for the person that they're hanging their hope on, that he's going to make America great again. And so anyway, I wanted to show that. Also, you see people, they're running in the direction of the warehouse. They're also running in the direction of a water tower. Keep that in mind. The last thing I wanted to point out is, did you see how panicked some of the Secret Service people were? Well, that might all be because they were unprepared. I want to show something here. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has been meeting with whistleblowers that are telling him behind closed doors in confidence that President Trump was purposely given inexperienced and inadequate coverage on the day of the Butler, Pennsylvania rally. Here's what was said. Senator Josh Hawley says whistleblowers have come forward alleging the Biden DHS assigned unprepared and inexperienced personnel to Trump who weren't even Secret Service. Whistleblowers who have direct knowledge of the event have approached my office. According to the allegations, the July 13th...
Okay, so this guy mixes in some accurate stuff with some absurd stuff.
...rally was considered to be a loose security event, Hawley said in a letter to Alejandro Mayorkas. For example, detection canines were not used to monitor entry and detect threats in the usual manner. Individuals without proper designation were able to gain access to backstage...
Okay, so everything he has said so far sounds reasonable.
...areas. Department personnel did not appropriately police the security buffer around the podium and were also not stationed at regular intervals around the event's security perimeter. In addition, whistleblower allegations suggest the majority of DHS officials were not, in fact, United States Secret Service agents, but instead were from the Department of Homeland Security investigation. This is especially concerning given that HSI agents were unfamiliar with standard protocol typically used at these type of events, according to these allegations. So what these whistleblowers are saying is that they purposely left Donald Trump insecure and inadequately protected, that they re-uniformed people that were Homeland Security agents as if they were Secret Service. It's no wonder they're running around. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to stand. They don't know to dive on the president's body. So on the one hand, it now makes sense why some of these people were so panicked. On the other hand,
okay, so I wasn't sure what MOA meant. It means minute of angle. It's a way of understanding angle on a shot.
why is Alejandro Mayorkas, who hates Donald Trump, purposely giving him inadequate coverage? Right? It's pretty crazy. It's very, very concerning. All right. Also, there was a woman behind President Trump in a black MAGA hat.
All right. This is ridiculous. All right. Just total nonsense.
Just before the shooting, she looks in the direction of the shooter and the snipers. She then covers her mouth with a Trump sign, but in reality, she was getting her cell phone ready so that she could film. As bullets start flying at Trump, she already has her cell phone recording. She remains very calm and focused during the shooting. She's now been identified as a top leader within.
All right, so this guy has some good points and then just mixes in a bunch of nonsense.
By 2030, she would like for the Secret Service to have as females. And I've seen, a lot of press actually about that, not just, has she said it once, but multiple times. She's got programs designed to help that in place and everything else. Here's the problem I see with that. As I mentioned before, the Secret Service has authorities, responsibilities, and duties specifically outlined in U.S. Code Title 18, Section 3056. Now, if you go in there and you actually read all the duties and responsibilities, not a single one of them has anything to do with gender or, inclusion, DEI, or hiring specifically 30% women, none of those things. Yeah. And while I do believe that she should absolutely lose her job, it's actually not for the things that people think. Like, do I think that she should lose her job over what happened on Saturday? No, I think she should lose her job because she wasn't good at it from day one. And I say that because I've seen true visionaries come into the Secret Service, and a visionary is somebody who not only is qualified to do the job. I mean, she's qualified to be the director, yeah. But is that what you want actually to direct the Secret Service in its future?
And the real question is she the most qualified? Because there are reports coming out that Jill Biden herself had a role in getting her appointed. It appears that she was a DEI hire to begin. When we have an agency that has a role as critical as the Secret Service, performance should be the number one objective in determining whether or not we hire. We want the absolute best, most capable person leading that organization. And quite frankly, those same standards should be applied as far as who fills the roles within that agency, agents.
So I do think that, I know there's a lot of people, I've heard a lot of statements about, that she was a DEI hire. I mean, there's no way you could actually know whether she's a DEI hire, of course, but the fact of the matter is, let's look at, how did she become?
So this is an interview with a Secret Service counter sniper who's off screen, but you can hear him, obviously.
The director of the Secret Service. She did know Jill Biden. She did know people on Jill Biden's staff actually that recommended, hey, somebody in her staff actually recommended, hey, she should be the director. I think she'd be a good candidate for that. And of course she was considered, and then she was nominated and brought up and, put in the position. So looking at that process, were there more highly qualified candidates? I mean, honestly, 100%, I could say, in my opinion, there were absolutely better candidates than her. I think that she's qualified, but was definitely not the most highly qualified individual that you would want in that position.
Yeah, again, going back to the critical role of whether it's Secret Service, whether it's other departments, law enforcement agencies, the military, special operations, we've seen this time and time again where this push to lower the standards to ensure that we can.
Right, and this is just devastating for morale, right? When less competent people get advanced, it destroys morale for those who are focused on competence and efficiency and excellence.
Get females in there. One of the things I'm really sick of and I'm tired of playing the game of is that, look, all women and men are equal. Their capabilities, however, are not. And let's stop pretending that they are. When you look at the Secret Service, when you look at the military, even like physical fitness standards and things like that, they're on a sliding scale. There's one standard for physical fitness for women, and there's a whole other one for men. If we are serious about wanting the best of the best in these roles, there should be no difference. There's one standard, everybody is held to that standard, you can meet that standard, and if you can't, then go on. If you're a female and you want to be a special operator or whatever, well, let's special operate. You know what? You need to be able to meet the exact same standards for men when it comes to whatever the physical fitness standards are. And I'm talking about not lowering those standards so they're more easily attained, which is what we see time and time again, but making sure that we have a very high, hard standard, tough standard to meet, and that everybody meets those, whether it's the amount of weight that you carry, how fast you can run, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, whatever it is. And we've seen the degradation of American capabilities time and time again because of these silly, stupid policies being pushed upon us that are nothing other than political activism. And we've seen political activists being put in place where we need leadership, not activism. And it does appear that has been the focus of Director Cheadle. I think anybody in charge of an organization like the Secret Service, when you have a failure as massive as what we saw, the embarrassment upon our country that the agency has brought upon us as a nation, as citizens, somebody that had some honor would just resign. I mean, no matter what, if the buck stops with you, you clearly did not set the tone, set the standard to where success was ensured. So it's time to move on and find another job. And quite frankly, if it is determined that there are men and women on the ground that failed, and look, these can be great people. Like, I don't care how good you are at anything. We have lapses in judgment. We have, maybe we're tired, maybe whatever it is. There are lots of incidents and examples where the highest performing people in a moment.
There are persistent problems with drinking. On JFK's assassination, more than half of his Secret Service protection detail was out drinking late and getting drunk. This is an ongoing problem in the Secret Service, and people who are caught with imbibing alcohol during times when they're not permitted to drink alcohol, right? The rest of the Secret Service usually bends around to protect them.
Fail. And, sometimes that's a matter of, holding them accountable. They should be held accountable one way or the other. It could be, some remedial training, maybe some sort of letter in the record, whatever it is. Or, hey, this is such a big deal that, yeah, you're a great asset to this organization, but this was a big deal, and it's time for you to go find another place to earn a paycheck. All right, so if you like content like this, make sure you like, subscribe, throw a comment down below, share this.
Play football. As a matter of fact, sometimes on Sunday afternoon, and I'm watching a football game or something like that, I think to myself, man, I could be a running back. I could do that, right? And then I get up off the couch to actually go get myself some chips or some soda or something like that. And then I realize when I feel my joints moving, maybe I'm not at the level the NFL would really like me to be, right? So, that's where the big difference is. Do you want somebody who's qualified? Am I qualified to play football? Sure, I could play football.
Yeah, I still occasionally have dreams because I used to cover the San Francisco 49ers training camp at Sierra Community College in Rockland. And I would have dreams that Bill Walsh, the head coach of the 49ers during the 1980s, I still get these dreams that he calls me to come in and to carry the ball for a few plays.
Can do it, right? But am I at the level that you really want? And you don't see the NFL going, you're qualified. You could play football. We'll take you.
Well, and more importantly, that doesn't make you less of a human being. It doesn't make you less valuable because you can't meet the physical standards.
Yeah, you should not be operating as a Secret Service agent when you have alcohol in your bloodstream. Right? There are rules in the Secret Service, no alcohol within 10 hours of going on duty. I think that's a solid rule. And I just rewatched In the Line of Fire, Clint Eastwood as a Secret Service agent who failed during the Kennedy assassination, and now he's in a cat and mouse game with someone bent on killing the current president. Terrific movie, a lot of fun to watch, and it does an excellent job of presenting the assassin's point of view, not just the conventional perspective.
That are required to play that sport.
Exactly.
And that is one of the things that gets continues to be conflated. Like, there are certain roles that men are going to be the best at, period. Like, men are stronger. Like, there's so many things.
Yeah, men and women have different gifts, right? Different people have different gifts. Ashkenazi Jews and West Africans and Northeast Asians and indigenous people from Central America all have different gifts.
that men do better than women, but that, you know what, there's lots of things that women do better than men. Just because you're a female and you can't meet these standards doesn't make you lesser of a person or lesser, less valuable in any way. It just means you can't do these things, and you shouldn't be doing these things, and we shouldn't force you into this role or force you upon other people that are trying to do this job at the highest level possible just because we're meeting some sort of quota.
So, a really good example of some of the things that you're talking about here is some years ago, actually, I was on a detail, and this was actually in Russia, and there was 2 agents that were standing in a hallway. They were protecting, the president at the time, and they were preventing people. Their post was to prevent people from coming down this hallway towards his room, his hotel room. And a couple of FSB guys, rather large guys, came up. And here's the thing:
people that don't know, FSB guys are Russian intelligence agents.
Right. When you tell them to halt, and then if they get within 15 yards of you, you've got to open fire if people refuse to halt, and you're on a protection detail.
So these guys were coming down the hallway, and one of the female agent that was there, I think she was a great agent, really good person, physically fit. She could pass the fitness test, flying colors, everything else. But she was also, fairly short. I think she was like maybe 5'3", 5'4", or something like that. 5'5" topping out there, right? And probably about 120 pounds. But she could do the job. She was really good at it. She knew what she was doing.
She could meet the standards that the Secret Service required, and did it at a high level, the current female standards that the Secret Service required of her.
Absolutely. And she was very sharp, smart, everything. Now, one of the FSBJ agents actually, when she stepped in front of him, actually reached out, grabbed her by the throat, throws her and pins her against the wall, and she's not able to really do anything against that. Now, the other agent that was there with her in the hallway, actually a rather large guy, excellent agent again, comes over, very sharp. He comes over and he resolves the situation. Let's put it like that. But I know that incident was so traumatizing to her. Actually, when she got back, into her credit, and I have mad respect for her still even today, she left the agency. She put in her resignation and said, this isn't for me. And I think that's a real wake-up call for some people, because I see a lot of things where people have a lot of opinions where people have the idea that being more diverse makes us better. Well, let's just say that that's true, right? But everybody who is diverse, who's in that job, should be equally as good and capable, as to do that job. If you're provided protection, to protect your life, do you want somebody who is, you fit the bill,
Okay, get more commentary here.
Or, sheriff's office, whatever. If they work with them, they're going to appoint those divisions and PDs to say, hey, we need you to cover this building. We're going to cover this building. They should be talking to homeowners in the area. If you look from a bird's eye view, there's actually homeowners that were never even approached by anybody from Secret Service prior to this event.
But one of the most interesting things is she tells me that her lot is right next to where Trump was speaking, and the Secret Service never came to talk to her pre-rally. They never asked her about anything. They never were set up in her area. And then I asked her afterwards if the Secret Service or the FBI has spoken to her. They still have not spoken to her.
These people could have absolutely hated Trump and been set up ready to go, and they have no idea. Now, obviously, the building that is in question was supposed to be watched by local law enforcement. And from what I understand now, there was 2 individuals from a SWAT team on the inside of the building. And apparently they were watching out the windows. Some would call these spectators, because on a building that small, I can't possibly see a reason why you would need to be on the inside of the building. The perimeter, to me, would be on.
It was a 90-degree day, so they wanted to stay in the air conditioning, and it was the Secret Service's responsibility to make sure that these local law enforcement were where they should be.
Top of the building, that's where you're going to have your best vantage point. But they said that there was a safety concern because of the sloped roof. Now, there's been a very popular meme that's kind of been shared around over the past few days of a literal cow on a roof that has a bigger slope than what we've seen in that video. Like, seriously, a cow just walking on the roof. No fear, just up there chilling. And so this slope on the roof, not only could Crooks get up there, and he seemed pretty comfortable with it, but also the slope on the roof that the Secret Service were actually already on had a deeper and more steep slope than the building that the police officers were in. And by the way, roofers do this all the time on pitches that are way more intense than this. I know any roofers that watch this it's probably maddening to them to look at the pitch of this roof and, tell them that, there's no way that you can figure that out. Come on, man. The other issue is how Crooks was able to get up on top of this building in the first place. Now, from the original shots, it looked like there was a really long, probably an 8, 10, maybe even 12-foot ladder that was on the outside. So people are thinking, how did this guy get this ladder and an AR and a backpack, carrying a backpack, all this stuff, up to this building without anybody noticing? Come to find out, he actually had a 5-foot ladder that he had bought either early in the day or the previous day. And he was able to get on top of the building from an AC unit and then, I guess, climb his way up the rest of it with that ladder. But how was he able to get to the building in the first place? Well, part of that is answered because now we know that there was no local law enforcement or Secret Service on top of that roof. Now, local law enforcement is pointing fingers at Secret Service. Secret Service is pointing fingers at everybody else, trying to deflect. But when it comes down to it, it is the job of the Secret Service to not only set the perimeter, but also go down a checklist and make sure everything is done. All of these threats are handled and people are in position before President Trump even comes out. So let's just go ahead and make that clear. But local law enforcement said, hey, we have enough guys that we can provide traffic control for the event. Now, here's where it gets really sketchy because local police said they sent.
All right, this is just so maddening. This is one of those rare news stories that has negatively affected my happiness. All right, it's diminished my sleep. All right, it just made me a little jittery and upset.
An email to Secret Service a couple of days before saying that they would not be able to secure that building. That building was already known to Secret Service as being a potential threat. They're saying they passed it off to local PD. Local PD is saying they sent an email a couple of days before. They never got a response.
Several buildings were identified as areas of a concern, which it did include the AGR building. Indicated we did not have the manpower to, take that task on as well, based on our number of officers on duty.
Butler Township Manager Tom Knights confirms that message was sent to the Secret Service 2 days before the Trump rally.
So while we have 2 or 3 guys inside that building, nobody was on the outside, and of course, nobody was on the roof. My thing is, how does Crooks even know that building's going
to... Excellence is not normal. All right, I think we've all had jobs, and we've all had jobs where we resent the boss for being too critical or too blunt or not caring or considerate or too much of a hard ass. But then sometimes you get a boss who's just not up to the job, who's not critical enough. It doesn't hold you accountable. Like, excellence is unnatural. It requires people, holding everyone below them to account, holding themselves to account, instilling an unnatural culture that venerates excellence, showing up on time, like getting the work done, communication. All right. All these things require extraordinary people creating an extraordinary culture, usually a masculine culture, to create this level of excellence in a field like law enforcement. And so if we want to denigrate masculinity, right, if we want to make law enforcement and military culture more feminine and more gay friendly, right, this is going to come at the cost of excellence, right? The type of excellence that you need in the Secret Service is overwhelmingly a masculine quality.
Going to be accessible. Well, an hour before, they spotted Crooks and said he was a suspicious person. So Secret Service knew about him an hour before Trump spoke. 20 minutes before, people see him on the roof. They also saw him with a rangefinder. So now he's getting the distance from where he is to where President Trump is going to be speaking. In the next 20 minutes, not only will a police officer...
Think about how infuriating the law enforcement response was on 9/11. Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York at the time, gets a lot of praise. But New York was really ill-equipped to deal with a situation like this. The firefighters and the police and other law enforcement agencies were on completely different radio frequencies and couldn't talk to each other. There was just really pathetic planning done for this type of event. It requires extraordinarily strong people who prize excellence more than other people's feelings, who are willing to put themselves out on the line. And Donald Trump didn't promote these type of people to run the Secret Service. Right? Joe Biden hasn't promoted these type of excellent people to run the Secret Service. Barack Obama didn't do it. George W. Bush didn't do it. So we don't have Secret Service leaders who are excellent. And as a result, we've got this incredibly mediocre agency that has the worst morale and the least job satisfaction of any agency in the federal government.
Be walking around the building, but also make contact with them. But Secret Service at this point knows that they have a suspicious person. So,
right, if you want a husband like Corey Compatore, right, you want men to emulate Corey Compatore and throw his body between harm and his family, right? You have to encourage a culture of honor and a culture of masculinity. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not particularly aware of any culture of honor within liberalism. Yeah, Trump didn't do much to fix the Secret Service. He degraded the Secret Service. He did as much harm to the Secret Service as he did benefit. And he made so many venal requests of the Secret Service that it's understandable the Biden administration reacted to his team's requests for resources with a skeptical eye, right? Donald Trump did much to encourage skepticism of his claims for Secret Service protection. When Joe Biden clearly won the election by, I think, November 7 of 2020, Donald Trump's administration denied Joe Biden adequate security. And General Kelly was Donald Trump's chief of staff at one point. And he was just horrified by what he saw going on with the Secret Service, right? He saw this security breach, and he took a long walk around what was supposed to be the most secure 18-acre property in the world of the White House. And what he saw was shoddy security, right? The so-called cutting-edge technology the Secret Service had deployed to prevent any intrusion. Well, nearly every piece of it had failed. The crucial sensor that normally detects movement coming over the fence line was on the fritz, and it never sounded an alarm to the Joint Operations Center. One of the motion-activated lights that was supposed to flash when someone crossed the White House grounds didn't work. A camera in the eastern portion of the grounds where the intruder entered wasn't functioning. When an officer spotted the intruder 17 minutes later, the radio on his shoulder wasn't working. It never relayed his location to his fellow officers. When he banged the radio switch to report he had a possible suspect, they didn't know he had found someone or where he was, so they couldn't rush to him, and they could not provide backup. So how did all these systems fail? Because the Secret Service was consistently out of money. Right? They were trying to get funds to get their technology repaired or replaced. And you just had a culture that was not conducive to excellence. Don Jr. and his wife Vanessa divorced during 2018, and Vanessa Trump then started dating one of the agents who'd been assigned to her family, and the agent didn't face any repercussions. Tiffany Trump, Donald Trump's daughter, broke up with her boyfriend from college and started spending an unusual amount of time alone with her tall, dark, handsome Secret Service agent. Right, the level of protection provided for Trump Tower and for all the people that Donald Trump wanted personally protected wasted, tens of millions of dollars of Secret Service funding that could have been more effectively deployed elsewhere. Right, Donald Trump consistently shortchanged his agents in their zero-fail mission. He created a new degree of burnout from people who were serving for him. The Secret Service went broke protecting all of Trump's venal whims. Right? Much of the financial problems of the Secret Service are directly attributable to the decisions of the Trump administration. Right? Trump took no notice of alarming bipartisan reports that the Secret Service was an agency in crisis. When Joe Biden emerged as the clear victor by November 7, the Secret Service declined to authorize Joe Biden's full protection detail that had always been provided to presidents-elect, a level of security approaching that of the president himself. Right? The director of the Secret Service and his team took their lead from the White House, where Trump blocked the normal, peaceful transition of power. Because of Donald Trump's insistence that he was the victim of some inexplicable fraud, Joe Biden did not receive the protection that he deserved. Right, the decision to withhold this security only compounded the Biden camp's fears that Donald Trump had corrupted the Secret Service. Right, many of the agents on Trump's detail were openly, publicly rooting for Donald Trump on Facebook and other forums. Right? You shouldn't have Secret Service agents making political statements publicly. After January 6th, many Secret Service agents took to social media to empathize with and defend the armed rioters who breached the Capitol. So all the ways that the Secret Service enabled Donald Trump's worst instincts in his final year, right, created great skepticism with regard to the Secret Service on the part of the Biden administration. Right? Was the agency entrusted with Joe Biden's life fully committed to that assignment? Right? The Biden administration initially wanted to swap out all members of the Trump presidential detail because they seem to be so corrupted. And this is the conclusion of the terrific Zero Fail book, which was published in 2021. Secret Service remains spread dangerously thin. And probably the only way we'll get real reform in the Secret Service is if we have some kind of horrific incident like what we had 8 days ago.
They are all aware of what's going on as far as there being somebody that they really need to watch. A couple minutes before, people see him on top of the roof, once again, with a gun. And then, of course, he starts opening fire right before people start running away once they realize that he's got a gun. Now, the snipers that were on the roof, if President Trump is looking out of the crowd, they would have been behind him and to the right. If you're looking at the stage, they would have been off to the left. Apparently, there was a tree that was actually blocking their vision from that roof. Now, the snipers that were to the right of President Trump, if you're looking at the stage, they did have a line of sight to the shooter. But at this point, it's too late, and of course, he fires off 3 initial rounds, the first one hitting Trump, and then he fires off 5 additional rounds. And of course, we know that, you know, he actually killed Corey Campitori, hope I'm saying that correctly, who was a retired firefighter, you know, and injured 2 additional people as well. So it's incredibly sad, and it is quite honestly a miracle Trump didn't get killed. It's honestly a miracle that he turned his head. Divine intervention. It really is just crazy because some of these graphics that are being shown now, they're just even more intense when you see exactly the way Trump was looking and the line of sight and the travel of that bullet. He was basically right on. He was spot on. Trump just turned his head just enough. So as sad as the whole situation is, for 8 shots, at least 3 pretty well.
All right. The Secret Service of the United States was set up July 5, 1865, initially to deal with counterfeiting.
Play shots, and you had all those people there. I mean, there was 15,000 people, I think, that were scanned. Man, holy crap! It could have been a really could have been a heck of a lot worse, of course, but it's still just a complete failure on the Secret Service all the way around. And the fact that they don't want to take any real responsibility for that is even more troubling, right? When you see, you know, there was a phone call with Kimberly Cheadle that, you know, 30 minutes in, the phone call just hangs up. There's senators on the line and they're trying to get answers, and it just hangs up. And then they confront her at the RNC, and she has nothing. She won't give them the time of day, no time to answer any kind of questions. She says she also won't resign, which is this whole thing is really, really troubling. And here's the other thing: how did Crooks even know this building was going to be available? How did he? I mean, if I'm going to an event like this, unless you're scoping it out or you have some kind of inside information, how would you ever know that a building that basically has the perfect line of sight to the president will be that wide open? Now, is it possible that he saw them scoping this out? Maybe. I mean, he did have some research in some of the things that they're finding of when the Trump rally was, so maybe he had an idea of when Secret Service would be out there scoping it. I have no idea. It's just, it gets more sketchy. The waters are more muddy now than they were a few days ago, and with more information makes this thing look so much more suspicious. And I'm not...
Yeah, it just keeps getting worse.
And that was his instinct to do that. If that's not your instinct, you don't belong. That's the bottom line, you know? And I got to be honest with you, I feel ashamed when I see things like that.
Well, like I said, is there anything that justifies what's happening in this picture? Like, I have a heart, like, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of tactic and technique that, you know, once we body bunker on the president, we need to have one person standing back. I don't know. Is there anything that justifies what is happening right here?
There is nothing that I can think of that justifies that in particular. You see everybody else.
What that looks like is a instinct of self-preservation.
Right, and if you look for a Google search on female agents ducking, diving, hiding behind Donald Trump during the shooting, right, you won't find any of these images coming up. It just looks like Google is actively trying to suppress photos showing the incompetence on the part of some of the female agents around Donald Trump.
Preservation. That looks like an instinct of fear. And I always want to give, I wasn't there, I don't know what happened. I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but there's nothing that I could come up with, and I just wanted to hear your insight to explain what is happening right here, because this is embarrassing to me if it is what it looks like on the surface.
And you're absolutely right. If this is what it looks like on the surface, it's incredibly embarrassing, right? For this agent as well as for the entire Secret Service, and for all those that did the right thing, you know, all those Secret Service agents, males and females, that ran to their protectee and covered him the best that they could. I give every last one of those, I give them an A here, just simply because, hey, within seconds. Now understand, you know, people can criticize, hey, they should have been there faster, they should have been closer to him, things like that. But the bottom line is, within seconds of when a shot was taken, they were.
So apparently there were 22 Secret Service agents at this Donald Trump event, and about another 80 members of local law enforcement.
They were running at him, and they had pigpiled him within seconds, covering them with their own bodies.
What happened?
The best that they could, even lifting their arms, trying to cover every part of him that was humanly possible, willing to sacrifice themselves for, honestly, for America, for freedom, and those, I see some TikTokers, I'm sorry, Gary, I'm like fired up about this. Sure. I see some TikTokers, I see some people out there, you know, they put these things on there. Hey, why did you miss hitting Trump? What is wrong with you? Like, that's such a narrow view. I mean, he represents a free election system, and if we can't do that as a country, if we can't protect that, it goes well beyond our borders.
Well, you know, and I think some of the vitriol that's even come from.
Okay, my theory right now is incompetence on the part of the Secret Service and the Biden administration. And right now, I suspect that there was an element of maliciousness in the deliberate withholding of adequate security from Donald Trump.
From sitting congressmen and women toward the president, whether they say it out loud or not. We definitely have had, you know, congressional aides, you know, tweet things like that as well. It's not just, you know, some random teenage TikToker. We've seen this level of vitriol, and I do believe that behind the scenes we have some elected politicians expressing those same views. But one of the things that constantly has come up, and I think is a super legitimate question, is we have females on President Trump's detail that are like 2 feet shorter than President Trump. Is the height, you know, you talked a little bit about the advance. Hey, you know, I'm gonna get on a stool, I'm gonna look at it from, I wanna be able to see from the protectee's perspective. One of the things that would just be a natural calculation in my mind is like, hey, I wanna have protectees that have the ability to actually put their body between the president and a possible threat. And if you are assigning protectees that are 2 feet shorter than the president himself, what is that about? Is that normal? Is the height of the president from the inner circle, is that normally part of the calculation of who is assigned to him? Because that seems very odd to me.
It should be, but it's not. Okay.
And you saw the Secret Service team that Donald Trump was with at the Republican National Convention. All right, it was all male. Right, there was not one female agent. And when you look at the Secret Service for Joe Biden, all the pictures that come up are white men.
And I think there's a lot of reasons that could fall into play. It's very unfortunate, but let's be perfectly honest, you know, the leadership of the Secret Service is going to be in some way politically tied, right? We know this.
So, you know, in a perfect, like, because I'm assuming, given the type of, you know, employees the Secret Service would attract and that job would attract, I mean, it's fair to say that there's some options when it comes to taller agents within the service, right? We could have had, regardless of the reason we didn't, we could have had agents that were capable, that were at least as tall as the president, so that we can provide him as much coverage as we possibly can.
I would like to say yes, that there's some females probably in the agency.
I'm not talking about females. I'm just saying
or just period.
That shouldn't even be, you know, whether they're a female or not, that should not be part of the calculation, in my opinion. And I think that's part of the problem, and we'll get into some of the DEI stuff on that. But, you know, to me, that's just an obvious, glaring example of what went wrong, and maybe something that needs to be addressed at the congressional level. That, like, hey, you know what? If you're 5 foot tall, you shouldn't be.
So I suspect the diversity, equity, and inclusion is less popular today than it was 10 days ago. I think some people are getting the lesson. I mean, do we have to have an airplane crash because we've used affirmative action to promote pilots or air traffic controllers who are not up to the job? I mean, how many people have to die from incompetence before diversity, equity, and inclusion becomes increasingly unpopular?
You shouldn't be assigned to a protectee that's 6'4". I mean, that just seems obvious to me.
It seems pretty obvious. I will be fair though. there are times when you want to look at, hey, do we have males and females? And sometimes your pool of, and I hate saying this, but I mean, let's be honest. I mean, look at the average height of males and the average height of females. So it's not, I'm not saying that women can't do the job, but what I'm saying is typically females are going to be smaller. There are some that are larger. I would love to see more of them actually in the Secret Service. But what this
even
does,
some of the females that were on the protected detail, they were both short and.
Right. I guarantee you, out of U.S. Secret Service agents, 19 times out of 20, right, the male Secret Service agent is going to be stronger than the female. Just as when I've dated, I don't think I've ever dated a woman who is more physically strong than I am.
And large.
So that's an equation, yes. So you do want some females because they can go places where the males can't, right?
Right, and you would get fired, you would get disciplined, all right, if you publicly came out as a Secret Service agent and just shared these, elementary truths that you want, tall Secret Service agents, that men are usually going to be stronger and more physically brave than women.
So, and that's, you really do want that capability, because you're not only talking, a lot of times you're talking about a protectee, usually a lot of times they might be traveling with a spouse, a child or something like that. You want, which they have their own details for them. Yeah. And if you have
multiple packages in the months leading up to the shooting, including those marked as possibly containing hazardous materials. So first, let's start off with a major strange aspect. Big question. How was this suspected shooter even able to get into position when reporting indicates that both spectators and law enforcement at the event were aware of him? Let me expand upon that. There were reports that people saw this shooter beforehand. There's even video that is circulated online of him seemingly checking out the roof, scoping out the area. There are those who say they saw him with a duffel bag and rangefinder. Then there are reportedly people who saw him climbing the roof. For example, Ben Macer told KDKA that he saw the guy move from roof to roof and told an officer that this shooter was on the roof. When I turned around to go back to where I was, it was when the gunshot started, and then it was just chaos, and we all came running away, and that was that. Now, apparently, investigators believe that Crooks had also used a bike to check out the Butler site, and according to the New York Post, a witness saw that bike around 40 minutes before the shooting. It's being reported that senators held a briefing with top Secret Service officials, including the director of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, who we'll talk a lot about, and one senator, John Barrasso of Wyoming, reported that more than an hour before the shooting occurred, the Secret Service had identified Crooks as a character of suspicion because they saw him with that rangefinder in that bag. And then, according to Fox News, sources say 10 minutes before Trump walked on that stage, the Secret Service supposedly changed their assessment. Instead of considering Crooks suspicious, they'd apparently...
Right, so I'm sure there are many tasks that female agents are going to consistently be superior to male agents, all right? Women, from my experience, often know what I'm thinking much more quickly and accurately than do men. So women have special gifts, men have special gifts. Female special gifts don't tend to be in the realm of physical strength.
He upgraded his status to a threat. And yet, despite all of that, the ex-president was still allowed to step onto that stage. Why? That's a big question, right? According to another Fox report, the Secret Service agent in charge was actually on the phone with local and state police about this threat, about this guy, while the shooting was taking place. There were also reports that a sniper from a local tactical team had snapped a photograph of the gunman, saw him looking through a rangefinder, again, this is before the shooting, and then radioed that information in to a command post. ABC News reported that the shooter was spotted by Secret Service counter-sniper teams 20 minutes before the gunshots rang out. And then there's reporting that a Butler Township police officer actually confronted the shooter, apparently was hoisted up to that roof. Crooks apparently spots him, points the weapon at the officer, who then lets go of his grip and drops 8 feet to the ground. Now, Butler County Sheriff Michael Sloop defended this officer's action, saying he probably saved Donald Trump's life by delaying what could have been a fatal shot. Quote, can you imagine 10 seconds before that the president was looking straight ahead and where that bullet could have potentially landed? So in total, the reporting indicates that Crooks first came on law enforcement's radar about, and this is an approximation, but...
So the first thing that outraged me when I started looking at video of the assassination is how it appeared that the counter snipers had crooks in their sights minutes prior to crooks opening fire. And I just don't understand. This is the one thing that bugs me the most. I don't understand why the counter snipers didn't take out crooks before he started firing on the president.
But it seems to be about 3 hours before the shooting. He was apparently walking by the magnetometers, carrying a rangefinder at one point. The bottom line, how come authorities didn't stop crooks? And more importantly, didn't stop Donald Trump from getting on that stage? And what complicates this, of course, is that the Secret Service director, Kimberly Cheadle, who I mentioned, seemed to at first say it was the responsibility of local law enforcement to sweep and secure the building that the shooter was perched on top of, although she has since backtracked from those comments. There's also reporting that police were inside the building, but not on the roof. And she also told ABC News that there may have been a danger to post a sniper team on the roof where the gun plants, because from starting your claim to uploading documents to talking to your legal team, it can all area. The apparent motive in this case, or what could be the motive. There is one more detail I have to get into. Why didn't the sniper team immediately take the shooter out? I mentioned all the different aspects about how they might have seen him beforehand. Was there an opportunity to take him out? So I want to play you some of my conversation this past week with former sheriff's deputy and SWAT member Chad Ayers and also former FBI agent Bobby Chacon.
So I noticed in many of the interviews with former and present Secret Service agents, they say, don't listen to anyone who hasn't been in the Secret Service. But I don't think that's right. All right. Often outside criticism is important. If it's accurate, we should welcome information, truth, or criticism from any source.
Stuff circling around the internet that they asked for permission to take the shot. That is absolutely false. In this type of situation, they do not have to ask for any type of authority to take a shot or utilize deadly force in this type of situation. When you are assigned and you've got a former president on there and someone is laying on the roof with a long gun, the first opportunity they have, they're going to take that. So again, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback or second this counter sniper unit. There's the possibility that maybe the angle and the slant of the roof, they couldn't get a visual on him until he got to a certain position.
Now, I think that when you look at the video of the counter sniper who took the shot, they're looking in the direction of that building. And I'm pretty sure that's because they're hearing radio traffic saying somebody's on the roof, because there was some chaotic situation over there. You saw the video of people saying, a woman saying, he's on the roof, he's got a gun. I'm sure that was put over comms. When you look at that roof, it's sloped away, and I don't think the counter sniper guys could actually see the shooter yet. He was crawling up. He was on his belly, and then what happened was an officer confronted him and then retreated. He turned around with his rifle towards the officer. What that did was make the guy move quicker. Then he popped up really fast over that peak and started shooting. That's when the guy on the sniper first, because you see them looking there, and they're probably saying, I see the roof, I don't see anybody. I see the roof, I don't see anybody. That's because he's behind that slight roof, and then he pops up, and then he starts firing, and then they fire back.
A couple things to note about that. So it seems that the counter sniper team that we had seen pictures of that were circulated in the media, this was the team that we had thought had neutralized the suspected shooter. It turns out they weren't the ones who took the actual shot that killed the gunman. This was apparently a different counter sniper team. But again, Bobby could be 100% right that there was a...
So I noticed that different groups have different gifts, different sexes have different gifts, and probably different political orientations have different gifts. So I would suspect for law enforcement and for military, a more traditional perspective is going to be most advantageous. All right, for those who put their lives on the line for protection or for service of the country, these are people who are going to put a great premium on honor. And I don't think there is a concept of honor, and I don't think there's a veneration of honor in liberalism. And please correct me if I'm wrong. What are the fundamental liberal texts that put a premium on honor? So I was looking back through Ronnie Goodman's work in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. And he talks about Sergeant Bergdahl. Remember, Sergeant Bergdahl wandered off his base in Afghanistan, and the Biden administration was blindsided right, by the outrage provoked by his decision to release 5 terrorist prisoners in exchange for the return of Sergeant Bergdahl, who deserted his post in Afghanistan before being captured by Taliban. And the administration's surprise reflected a fundamental culture clash, right? The administration had contempt for Americans who'd be so dumb as to join the military rather than going to Harvard. And Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, praised Sergeant Bergdahl for serving with honor and distinction. Right? She failed to appreciate that desertion is among the very worst transgressions a soldier can commit against his comrades. It's not like sleeping in on a Monday morning and ducking Gender Studies 101 class, right? The problem wasn't just the strategic wisdom of the prisoner exchange, or it's the cultural values which it ratified. It was the imposition of liberal values to the detriment of military virtue and honor. To say that Sergeant Bergdahl, who wandered off his assignment, served with honor and distinction is obscene for anyone with a traditional conception of honor. There was a United States Supreme Court ruling on United States versus Virginia, which held that it was unconstitutional for the Virginia Military Institute to have a policy of excluding women. And Justice Antonin Scalia wrote in the minority opinion, it is precisely VMI, Virginia Military Institute's attachment to old-fashioned concepts such as manly honor that has made it the targets of those who want to abolish public single-sex education. So the liberal justices and the majority justices just assumed the technocrat position, just scrutinizing the facts. You know, how much evidence is required to prove that women cannot adapt to a Virginia Military Institute education? But the true stakes, right, for those who aren't liberal, all right, refer to concepts such as honor, right? It's not about uprooting irrational preconceptions about women's capabilities. It's not about advancing, it is about advancing an agenda of social engineering to discredit ideals such as honor that the dominant liberal left elite regard as archaic and benighted. Manly honor is incompatible with the liberal left hygienic conception of life. On the other hand, for public health and probably for a lot of medicine, a liberal left hygienic conception of life is a great idea. Right? Liberals dismiss manly honor. They think it's sexist and racist and contributes to gender inequality. Right? But it's male individuality. It's male exuberance, male aggressiveness, male concepts of honor that from the left's perspective must be stringently curbed and disciplined to meet the requirements of bureaucratic success. So if you want to succeed in most bureaucracies, it strongly helps to have a liberal left hygienic conception of life. So bureaucracies tend to enable the comfort of the effete and the androgynous male who fits the feminist model of manhood. Right? Liberals tend to oppose manly honor, not so much to promote gender equality, but just as part of their primordial attraction to the disciplined conformism of an institutional bureaucratic ethos, right? The hygienic conception of life cannot tolerate male individualism, exuberance, and aggressiveness, right? These are all primitive virtues that threaten our rational social order. So equal protection review is merely the ideological facade behind which liberalism targets these traditional virtues. So conservative claimants of cultural oppression see the political as emerging out of the ostensibly apolitical. So the elites contrapose equality to inequality, but conservatives see a contest between the elite's supposedly higher civilization and the half-savage relics of past times themselves, people who value guns, religion, and honor. So feminist principles are applied highly selectively, right? You can get a global rap superstar can rap about, raping women. And if someone was an American soldier or someone was conservative saying the same things, it would be cited as incontrovertible evidence of a misogynistic culture. So people on the right tend to have a more traditional, more medieval worldview than people on the left. Right? People on the right, in having a medieval worldview, believe that honor, order, morality, meaning exist outside of one, and that the meaning in your life is shaped and constrained by your ability to fit into this objective order of things. It's the background against which you make sense of your life, right? Living a full life from this traditional medieval perspective means recognizing your place within a wider order and acknowledging your dependence on a greater order. For the modern liberal left perspective on life, we have a buffered identity where every individual on his own is able to create meaning, purpose, and order just with the power of his own reason. Right, so from the pre-modern, medieval, traditional, right-wing conservative perspective, right, honor is part of the universe, and we can reject it or embrace it, but it's there, right? There's always the possibility of sin and dishonor. Now, liberals see commercial prosperity as an antidote to the culture of honor. Right, so liberalism wants to harness the ego to commercial expansion rather than creating a world where there's this underlining, moral honor code, where you have the glory of the king, the honor of the nobles, right? Maybe Republican virtues of pagan antiquity. The modern liberal dismisses these concepts of honor as intangible goods, just mere vainglory, part and parcel of the repudiation of anthropocentricity, right? The rise of the disengaged subject who can step back from inherited traditional religious worldviews. So honor and glory presuppose a thicker cosmology, right? An intuitive sense of things, an intuitive significance that is regarded as irredeemably subjective and primitive from the modern naturalist, liberal, dominant elite worldview. So liberals tend to be exasperated with conservative preoccupations with guns and religion, with intangible and merely symbolic goods like honor, the flag, the moral fiber of society. So liberals see a sharp distinction between the symbolic and the substantive. Right? Conservatives are governed by their primal passions. Liberals are governed by their interests. So the target of the liberal elite's ordering impulses are to bring into control notions of honor. Right? You want to tame the honor ethic. You want to tame these vainglorious impulses which are incompatible from a liberal perspective with the smooth functioning of a hygienic commercial society. So lamenting the gender integration of the Virginia Military Institute ordered by the Supreme Court in the U.S. versus Virginia, Justice Scalia said it is powerfully impressive that a public institution would require all first-year students to keep VMI's Code of the Gentleman. Right? And this code is an honor code. And without strict observance of this honor code, no man, no matter how polished, can be considered a gentleman. Right? The honor of a gentleman demands the inviolability of his word, the incorruptibility of his principles. He is a descendant of the knight, the crusader. He is the defender of the defenseless, the champion of justice, or he is not a gentleman. But honor gets little respect in contemporary culture, particularly among intellectuals. It gets as little respect as chastity, right? So from a modern liberal left, secular humanist view, honor and chastity are both primitive atavisms in a modern society. They are ideological leftovers in the consciousness of obsolete classes, such as military officers or grandmothers. So once an insult to one's honor was deemed a serious social and possibly legal offense, someone who now fights to defend his honor will be seen as neurotic, abnormally sensitive, or hopelessly provincial. Right? And these judgments are the received wisdom. Honor cannot be translated into non-anthropocentric terms. So this enables liberals to dismiss traditional values like honor as just so much empty bluster, right? Symptoms of emotional conflict and intellectual confusion rather than something real. So in a world of honor, the individual discovers his true identity in his role, fitting into a pre-existing order. And to turn away from your duty and from your role is to turn away from reality. In a world of dignity and honor, the individual discovers his true identity by reconciling himself to the existing order. So the conservative much more likely to still cling to a world of honor where he will throw himself over his wife and children to protect them. This is the code of the gentleman. This is the clean-cut look of conservative think tank interns. This is the patriotism of Sarah Palin rally attendees, and this is the source of liberal animus. So the conservative's original sin is not his chauvinism or his classism, but his low level of consciousness that facilitates ideas about honor. His inability to be so disengaged and reflexive and buffered that he still sees the world through his sense of honor.
There's a visual obstruction in their way, and that's why they didn't act quicker. And by the way, we are not putting blame on them whatsoever. They were able to neutralize this target immediately. There is one more thing I have to mention as well. According to Brian Enton from News Nation, and this is on Twitter, or X, quote, sources within the Secret Service say the working theory right now is the Secret Service sniper did not initially shoot Crooks because the sniper thought Crooks was a police officer on the roof. Okay, so another possible explanation for what happened here. Now, I want to talk about one of the strangest aspects of all of this. Motive, right? Why would Crooks supposedly do this? And that is where we get into this whole other territory, because it's so weird. It's so weird. The FBI is poring over his cell phone history, his online search history, digital footprint, and there appears to be, at the time of this recording, no clear motive, no apparent political or religious ideology or motivation. And as far as we know from reporting, there's no manifesto, there's no note, there's no writings, there's no social media posts that outline a motive or plan here. And that includes interviews, by the way, because apparently the FBI conducted over 200 interviews with family, neighbors, co-workers. They can't find anything. Now, there is reporting that Crooks did conduct searches online about major depression disorder. According to ABC News, Crooks had been registered as a Republican voter, but a $15 donation to this progressive group was also labeled and recorded under Thomas Crooks.
Okay, let's bring Elliott Blatt to the show. Elliott, what's going on, man?
Hi, Luke. Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Yeah. All right. I don't know what happened last time. So just an amusing story while you were sort of talking about, you know, gendered law enforcement issues. I'm sitting here, I'm in Marin County, right by the Marin County Jail. And just as I'm listening, this pair of cops walks by. One is like this 6'6", you know, Chad man. And walking next to her is like this 5'6", super wide woman with a giant police, you know, vest wrapped around her torso, you know, that was just like buckling at the seams, you know. And I just thought it was pretty amusing. Little synchronicity there.
Yeah.
I guess you had to be there.
No, I can see it in my mind.
So this story has really captivated you, Luke.
Yeah. I mean, my views are like 6 times my views over the previous 2 months.
Yeah. And, you know, I was thinking about this. Why do I kind of shirk from this story? And why does Luke just walk into the fire? Because I've been really trying to not think about this story. And I realized why Luke is Luke, what the essence of Lukehood is. Do you want to hear it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Luke is comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that's why he streams. He's willing to discuss uncomfortable topics and not shirk from them. And does that strike you as...
Yes.
Is that the essence of you?
That's the essence of me, yeah.
Because I think, you know, what does Luke talk about? Everything, you know, it's everything we like to bury. You know, racism, sexism, pornography, sex, Judaism, anti-Semitism. It's all these things we don't want to talk about. And you're right there in the thick of it. So I don't know. It's somewhat of an epiphany. I mean, I've always kind of known it, but I was able to finally sort of summarize it in one quick sentence. So, have you always been this way?
Probably some predispositions, because I've always said I've always wanted to dive into uncomfortable topics, but there are times where my life has been, say, more successful or more connected, where I have tamped down that desire to maintain my social standing and my friendships.
Yeah. But you keep being drawn back into the fire. You know, it's not like,
yes.
So you're like, you suppress this urge for you to be, you know, socially incorporated. You have to basically disguise who you are.
Or just it doesn't have to come out, right? There are times where it's inappropriate to bring out the uncomfortable, and there are times I don't want to talk about the uncomfortable. So it's not so much disguise. I think it's more about knowing the time and place, right? It's much more appropriate for me to do it on a live stream than to intrude it into a conversation where it's not wanted.
Yeah, and that's why you stream, because
yes,
it's like you need that outlet because it's just so much part of your identity, and you know, this is your art form, and you need to express it. So, anyway,
like
are you going to cover Biden today? So
maybe. What? Any thoughts?
Well, I've been listening to a lot of Mark Halpern, and
yes.
And, you know, the consensus coming into this weekend was that this was the weekend where, you know, Joe makes the decision to step aside. And then suddenly, you know, he starts talking about Biden digging his heels in and maybe not dropping out. And so this is kind of a cliffhanger, kind of a nail biter. And then it's basically Nancy Pelosi has to basically ramp up the heat on Joe Biden until he finally screams uncle and drops out. But what is the current state of play?
I haven't followed it much in the last 48 hours. So Mark Halpern on Friday said that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi is going to keep upping the pain on Joe Biden until he drops out. And every day is going to bring more pain until perhaps eventually you'll get a movement for the 25th Amendment where a majority of the cabinet declares him unfit.
And, okay, yeah, so it's super interesting that that's how the real world works, right? Nancy Pelosi is friends with Joe Biden until he becomes inconvenient for her, or Democrats broadly speaking. And this is how the world, this is how the real world works. I just got up. I'm babbling.
That's how the world works. They don't do this to me.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we're going to get like a Spencer-esque speech from Biden, So anyway, interesting times. May you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
No, I don't have much more to say.
Okay. Let me jump in then. So I reached out to Ronnie Goodman over the past 2 weeks saying, how do you explain conservatives seeing Joe Biden's clear senility for the past 4 years and liberals in the establishment elite media only coming around to it June 27th after the debate? And like, what's the nub of your critique? And he says it's the new class, right? The culture of the new class, the new elite exacts costs. So its discourse emphasizes the importance of carefully edited speech, but this has the vices of its virtues. In its virtuous aspect, self-editing implies a commendable circumspection, carefulness, self-discipline, and seriousness. However, right, this careful discourse, right, it also creates something that sounds retarded, right? It also creates discourse that sounds stilted, where you don't talk about what's clearly in front of you.
Yeah, what I think of is, I don't know if you've been with a group of women, right? And then some controversial topic shows up in the conversation. And what they immediately do is they start looking around the room and monitoring the facial expressions of other women before they know whether or not to agree or disagree. right? There's a certain sideward glancing that goes on. And then if the answer is yes, everyone's enthusiastically yes. If the answer is no, everyone's enthusiastically no. You know, I've seen this dynamic played out. I told you this story once about, I brought up the issue of, you know, that schools should be gender segregated. And, you know, then there was a bunch of sideward glancing, and it was determined by the group that that was a no-no. And I got serious opprobrium. So anyway, I think that's what's going on. Like, nobody knows what to do, and because they're so group oriented, that they just go with the consensus, and it just finally takes somebody to stand up and catalyze what the decision is, and then they follow.
Yeah. So this is what Ronnie Goodman says in his email to me. So he says, people have strong career interests in a second Biden term, and they will not sacrifice their own interests for the greater good. So the new class of elites is no gathering of benign technocrats selflessly promoting the public good. It is a morally ambiguous, flawed, universal class that is elitist and self-seeking, uses its special knowledge to advance its own interests and power, and embodies the collective interests only partially and transiently when compared to their own interest.
Yes. They're very abashed by their own self-seeking, and they like to wrap it in a cloak of communal interest.
Yeah.
Right. I'm doing this for the poor. I'm doing this for the downtrodden, for the immigrant. You know, but they'll sell them out in an instant if it advances their careers on an individual basis. Very fun to watch.
And Ronnie Goodman adds, when you contrast Joe Biden's cognitive decline and the denial about it with Trump's triumphal fist-raising defiance of death this weekend in Pennsylvania, you have the perfect symbolic embodiment of conservatives' belief that a decadent liberalism is sapping the vitality of the country, with Trump carrying the flame of that endangered vitality.
Yes. He's got away with words, does that Ronnie Goldman.
Yes.
Anyway. Hey, listen, I'm at the farmer's market. I got to get myself some vegetables. But I'll be listening. All right.
Okay.
Peace.
Blessings.
Bye. Blessings.
Okay. Take care.
And apparently a member of local law enforcement had also engaged the shooter, seeming to mean that this local marksman had fired a shot. So with that, here once again is former SWAT team member Chad Ayers talking about this concept of, was Crooks acting alone?
Yeah, I can understand where people are coming from on this, but obviously the audio acoustics, it can do strange things. We've all been in baseball stadiums when fireworks go off, or obviously I've been involved in deadly force encounters and shootings multiple times in my career. The echo, the ricochet. Now, keep in mind, a lot of what we are hearing as outsiders, there's microphones involved all over that stage, so we're hearing different delays and things like that. As I have watched this video, I mean, Jesse, it seems like 1,000 times by now. Yes, I feel like it's consistent with the initial fire from the shooter, taking his rounds, followed by the counter sniper team's rifles. And then likely that last one they are hearing is the locals counter sniper taking that shot that the DA's reported that gentleman's been placed on leave. Also, the sound aspect, right? You might have a mixture of these counter sniper guys who have suppressors on their rifles, which I would assume many of them do. Your local counter sniper may not have had a suppressor on his rifle, so you're going to get different audios through that feed. But again, at the end of the day, I am confident we are still working with one.
Right. So at this point, I reject all the conspiracy theories about the shooting of Donald Trump, except I am open to there may be maliciousness in the choice to provide Donald Trump inadequate security, not just incompetence. I'm open to deliberate maliciousness somewhere in the Biden administration.
Shooter and multiple law enforcement shooters.
But it's not just that, because there was reporting from a former classmate of Crooks that he had failed to make the school's rifle team back in the day because he was such a bad shot. So does it make sense that Crooks was able to take that shot? Wouldn't that be really difficult? Also, I mentioned all of the explosives and the bomb-making materials. A 20-year-old guy, no
Okay, I went through Ronnie Goldman's book on conservative claims of cultural oppression for every reference to this new ruling class of elites. And Alvin Gouldner wrote the seminal book on this topic back in 1979. And he says, higher education is the institution through which the new class, readied for contest against the old class, universities are the finishing school of the new class's resistance to the old class. So conservative claimants of cultural oppression believe that the elite universities from which the liberal elites hail are more akin to social fraternities than to Platonic academies. So much of education is getting educated about the process of education and fitting in with it. So things like diversity, equity, inclusion statements, they have a positive value in weeding out weirdos who are unwilling to do things that they don't believe in simply for the sake of getting along, right? To get along with people, from a spouse to a cousin to people at your church or synagogue or workplace, right? You have to go along with a bunch of nonsense. And if you're unwilling to put up with nonsense, you're going to have a real hard time maintaining any relationships. So admission to an elite university is usually seen as a marker of intellectual merit. And it helps if your profile fits the school's image of itself, that you fit in with the right people, right? That you make the right signals about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you're on the right side, and that you despise the trads. So academic merit is in part not just objective excellence, it's a social construction of the ruling liberal elites. It's an institutional filter designed to weed out conservatives and set the stage for widespread liberal domination. And this is first inculcated in the university, and these elite tastes and habits are later enforced with the threat of social ostracism. It's simply assumed on Manhattan's Upper West Side or in the CBS newsroom that one has the correct liberal opinions, and those who do not will simply stop receiving dinner invitations. Right? The ostracism of conservatives is an essential part of progressive behavior. So the elite universities have replaced the old WASP regime of social virtue revolving around gentility and honor and moral character. Now we have a new regime of intellectual virtue revolving around raw mental firepower. Now, conservative claimants of social virtue, of cultural oppression, says that these are social virtues in disguise. Right? In the elite universities, the symbol of the new American elite, the new establishment, it is no longer just a way of thinking. It is built-in mind furniture you take for granted without needing to think. So our nation is filled inexorably with airheads, nominally educated, formally educated, yet ignorant, trained and groomed like prize puppies to be good liberals. And classic example of that is the Trump shooting, right? Anyone familiar with high-powered rifles who saw what happened and heard what happened would have known within 10 seconds that this was an assassination attempt. But the dominant liberal media followed the protocol. You don't call something an assassination until a law enforcement bureaucracy has conducted an investigation and declared it an assassination. So if you followed conservative common sense, right, you would have known it was an assassination within 10 seconds, just like you would have known in 2020 that Joe Biden had senility issues. So just as the classic finishing schools strove to inculcate a certain physical posture, so now the elite universities inculcate a certain mental and moral and spiritual posture through which to announce yourself as curious and broad-minded, that you're given to scientific detachment and dispassionate analysis, that you're a member of the anointed in good standing. Right, so your self-esteem becomes tethered to liberalism. You become prize puppy liberals who do not see their intellectualism as an exercise in social signaling. So the student radicals of the 1960s were later attracted to careers through which they could influence opinions and attitudes, but not everyone shares their passion. And so the radical expressive individualism that liberalism celebrates will only resonate for those who share this powerful need for symbolic manipulation and the social privilege that permits it. The 1960s were a revolution of the privileged, by the privileged, and for the privileged. It was a revolution not of individualists against collectivists, but of one collective against another, for the people of fashion against the common people. whose cause is now being taken up by a conservative. So the new class of professional knowledge workers tends to be on the left, right? It doesn't believe in traditional hierarchies, doesn't believe in all the privileges of the old class of bourgeois capitalists. This new class promotes a linguistic culture, a culture of careful and critical discourse, CCD, and because no doctor had come out, no qualified doctor, no doctor that the new class would respect had come out with a diagnosis of Joe Biden being in significant cognitive decline. Therefore, that was not even considered a possibility until it became blindingly obvious after the June 27 debate. So we have a culture of careful and critical discourse which discourages visceral language, right? And it removes authority from all speech grounded in traditional authority. Right? The new class is hostile to tradition, clinging to guns and religion. Right? It's a new class who wants to maintain its dominance. It may be egalitarian when attacking the privileges of the old class, but it also seeks to maintain its own special advantages when it attempts to control the supply and limit the production of its culture, to oppose any group that restricts its control over the culture, and to remove legal and moral restrictions on the dominance of its culture. Right? The new class opposes formal censorship, but it has its own interests to protect. So when the new class was rising to power, it was particularly opposed to censorship, but now that it's in power, right, it no longer is nearly as opposed to censorship. Right? It practices unofficial censorship by limiting discussion to members of its own elite. So you have to swear that you won't use certain genetic studies to make anyone feel marginalized or disadvantaged. So without that, you don't get access to a lot of important data. Right? So the new class tries to limit discussion to members of its own elite and dismisses those who have not been properly credentialed. Right? So the new class develops a new hierarchy of knowledge. So what liberals see as conservative primordial anti-intellectualism is really a specific reaction to this new class and to its cognitive privileges. Right? The new class claims its cultural capital on the basis of its culture of careful and critical discourse. But its careful and critical discourse takes on a life of its own to fulfill its need for privilege and status. It wishes to be recognized as the most reflexive and insightful way of being. Right? They engage in serious speech. So they claim superior intellect and morality. Right? So careful critical discourse by our dominant elite treats the relationship between those who speak their discourse and others about whom they speak as a relationship between judges and the judge. There is an established social hierarchy between those who speak their particular discourse and understand it and those who do not. And to participate in elite culture, right, you have to be emancipated from conventional and traditional hierarchies. So this is a hierarchy between those who stand above normal human emotions and traditional attachments and those who do not, between those who are capable of disengagement and reflexivity and the buffered identity and those whose sensibilities are medieval and pre-modern. Right, the new class don't feel disgust toward homosexuality. They don't shame unwed mothers. They feel themselves emancipated from these primitive moral standards. Right, their loathing of conservatives is simply a corollary of their ethos of disengaged self-control and self-reflexivity. Right, their loathing of conservatives is always couched in a utilitarian facade as wanting to minimize harm. It's a response to the perniciousness of conservative ideas. But it's really a claim to maintain their power. Right? This is not an elitism of wealth, but of a particular morality. That they have the ability to sublimate, to intellectualize, and to etherealize life. So conservatives sense that liberal equality taken to its logical conclusion would redound to the cause of conservatives. So let me pull myself together here. Come on, 40. Get it together, man. All right, we need to learn to forgive.
I don't know
Fred
what
Luskin.
the word is. I like the fact that I resonate with what Herb says. There's a like a reality that you don't want to be delusional about, and that's not exactly what he said. But I know we share a firm belief that part of our job as human beings is to make peace with the way it is. And as a psychologist, much of my training was in like cognitive approaches to psychology. And the cognitive approaches to psychology are all about the ways we in our minds fantasize about things that don't exist, and then make believe that our fantasies should become reality. And then when the world doesn't agree to allow our fantasies to become reality, we don't forgive it. And that's the whole issue in a nutshell. And I wish it wasn't that simple. And I wish it wasn't, not simple, easy, not easy, obvious, that this is a world of incredible beauty and incredible ugliness, a world of incredible kindness and incredible selfishness. And so it's this multiplicity of everything. You know, the diversity in this world is shocking, that there's flavors and shapes and sizes and of everything through every dimension. And so we decide that we only want to experience certain parts of this enormity. So we choose a partner, and we decide that we don't want to experience betrayal, even though that's a normal aspect of this human life. We just don't want it. So we fantasize that because we don't want it, it won't happen. Or we fantasize that we can say to our partner, you can't cheat on me. And the partner says, yeah, well, you know, basically, if I still like you, I'll be faithful. Or unless I'm a serial cheat, I'll be faithful. Or, you know, maybe.
All right, this is Fred Luskin, author of the book Forgive for Good. He is a professor at Stanford University, head of the Stanford Forgiveness Project.
Maybe I'll fall out of love with you, but we don't want to go there. We want our fantasies. And we maintain these fantasies with what, you know, I call unenforceable rules. That these are demands or expectations or, you know, shoulds or musts or have tos or oughts or whatever you want to call it. They're saying to life, I'm only going to be okay with you, life, if you give me what I want. And if you don't give me what I want, then because I have this rule and you've broken the rule, then I'm going to give myself full permission to be pissy as hell. And that's the deal we make within our own heads.
Okay, some great points there from Fred Luskin. All right, finishing up about the new class and it's careful, critical discourse, right? It comes with some downsides, right? This careful, critical discourse disposes toward an unhealthy self-consciousness, towards stilted, convoluted speech, an inhibition of play, imagination, and passion, and continual pressure for expressive discipline. And this is why the dominant liberal elite media was so late to the game of recognizing that President Joe Biden is senile. Right, for all its watchfulness and self-discipline, the culture of critical discourse creates a loss of warmth and spontaneity. Right, this is not a visceral discourse. Right, it's very reflexivity, meaning constantly monitoring itself, means constantly adjusting what you're saying to patterns of propriety. Right, there's a structured inflexibility when facing changing situations, such as when it is blindingly obvious that Joe Biden is not up to the job. And sometimes there will be a disregard of the difference in situations and an insistence on hewing to the required rule. And so that's why the news media looked so ridiculous for years, claiming that conservatives were just factually wrong when they noted that Joe Biden had severe, cognitive impairments. All right, let's get a burst here from Fox News.
Yanis's latest reporting that Secret Service did not attend a meeting 9 a.m. of the day of the rally with local law enforcement, and that local law enforcement was not on the same communication channel with the Secret Service. Your thoughts?
Well, the Secret Service has taken ownership of the security failure, the massive security failure that led to the attempted assassination of the former president, and rightfully so. They are responsible for not only creating the overall security plan, including the requests and direction to resources from state and local law enforcement, but also to ensure the effective implementation of that plan. So there's going to be a lot that they have to explain, and the director gets that opportunity tomorrow in front of Congress. But what I can tell you is this is going to lead to a larger discussion, one about overall resources and capabilities of the Secret Service. And if the questions go that way, which I recommend they do, then the Secretary of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas, is going to have some explaining to do. The Secret Service has historically been asked to do more with less, and that's unacceptable. So if these resources, based on request or threat level, are not being provided because they're just not there to give, then that's a huge problem and not something that should hang entirely on the agency itself. DHS, now 22 years after existence, it's time to ask hard questions. They did not get the creation of DHS right the very first time. It should be reevaluated, and we should look and see if the Secret Service actually belongs within DHS.
To your point, House Speaker Mike Johnson today said the buck stops with Secretary Mayorkas. Let's play that.
We have added additional resources, even in the most recent appropriations, to the Department of Homeland Security, but the buck stops there. Secretary Mayorkas is in charge of that agency. If he needed to allocate more resources to the Secret Service, then that should have been done.
So it sounds like not only will the Secret Service director be on the hot seat tomorrow, but Mayorkas at some point maybe too.
And I think that's fair game. Look, the past 3.5 years, the Department of Homeland Security has been in crisis mode. It has become the Department of Immigration and Borders. So how much attention has the Secret Service been given by this administration the past 3.5 years to make sure that they have the capability to do their jobs? They've got an important mission, and it's important that the Secret Service comes out of this stronger and are given the tools to be effective in what the American people are tasking them with doing.
I know the men and women who protect former presidents, current presidents, have a very difficult job. So I want to be sensitive to that. Their leadership may have messed up, but they're putting their
to the men and women of the Secret Service. We saw that unfold as they're screaming directions at the former president to get down to the ground. And then.
Okay, so we have 3 books on the history of the Biden administration. And you may be curious, how do they deal with Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline? Right, we've got The Last Politician Inside Joe Biden's White House and The Struggle for America's Future by Franklin Foer. We have The Fight of His Life inside Joe Biden's White House by Chris Whipple. We have The Internationalist, The Fight to Restore American Foreign Policy After Trump by Alexander Ward. How do they deal with Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline? They ignore it. How much attention do they give to how active a role the president has played in governing the country? They ignore it. When I go to Google Scholar, right, how many articles do I find by academics, by experts on Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline? Right? None. Right? All the articles that exist say that Joe Biden is just fine, right? That he does not demonstrate cognitive decline. On the other hand, it's obvious that Donald Trump is unfit for office. So couldn't find any academic articles noting that Joe Biden lacked the cognitive fitness for office. Right? This topic just completely ignored by our academic elites. Okay, here's the best single video recreation of the shooting.
Home Depots. If anybody knows, I know my Home Depots. And so here is the Home Depot right up here in Butler. And the Lowe's is even right next to it also. And this is the site right down here where everything took place. It was right in here. So it's barely a mile away. It also could have been another Home Depot closer to Bethel Park where he lived, because he went to this gun shop here, the Allegheny Arms and Gun Works, and he picked up 50 rounds of ammunition on his way up to Butler, Pennsylvania. Now it's 3 p.m., 3 hours before the shooting, and the shooter tries to get in through security, but the magnetometers pick up his digital rangefinder, which is used to give you distances. They allowed him in, surprisingly, but they kept an eye on him, and then he left the area.
Why on earth would they allow him in with the rangeometer?
Okay, so now I made up this diagram here from an overhead photo of what was going on. Now the shooter would have been way over here off to the lower left on top of the roof of one of those other buildings, which is about the same height as these over here. You can see here these red barns. And he probably would have been at about this height here, pretty much eye to eye with the Secret Service counter snipers. So remember, this is north, this is pointing north here, and then this is pointing south. So the bullets would have come from this direction from the shooter and would have to come this way towards Trump and gone over here. So that's why you see this is the locations of our victims. This one here died, he's the red dot, and the 2 yellow dots are the ones that were injured, and we know one of them was sitting right directly in the corner of the back of the bleachers here. I will be showing you later what happened here to this boom lift. But remember, we had 2 sets of snipers for the Secret Service. One was right here covering the north side, and another set was right here covering the south side. Now the Secret Service counter sniper team starts setting up. So this is the north team, and they're setting up on their barn, which is going to be on the left side of the stage if you're facing the stage. And this is the south side team here. So they are over barn number 14, which is on the right side of the stage if you're facing the stage. So these guys are getting set up with their gear. And then at 5:06 p.m., WTAE got this video from a guy who was just shooting there with his cell phone. And you can see the shooter walking outside the secure area. He's outside the fenced area, and he's scoping out that building. And the guy pans around a little bit, comes back again, and now he's just standing there outside the fence area. Kind of eerie. And then at 5:14 p.m., a police sniper captured this photo of the shooter. He was apparently using a rangefinder in his cell phone, and at this point he became a person of interest, and after this they lost sight of him. Then at 5:28 p.m., he took a picture of this bicycle and a backpack. Don't know what the significance is of these. Meanwhile, the crowd is enjoying a really great time in the afternoon. They have no idea what's about to go down. They are just blissfully unaware at this point. At 5:33 p.m., former President Trump's motorcade arrives at the Butler, Pennsylvania rally.
Our President Trump is in one of those vehicles. There he is. We don't know which one, but we know he's there. Look.
Now, here's where things really start to get dicey in the timeline, because check out this headline from ABC News. This was a couple of days ago.
Okay, Martin Gurri wrote a terrific essay on the Joe Biden debate. Joe Biden in a tear in the fabric of things. So remember, the biggest difference between conservative media and mainstream media in the United States over the past 4 years is over Joe Biden's cognitive health. On the conservative side, it was taken for granted that Joe Biden shows significant signs of cognitive decline. It's usually described in the visceral word senile. And the mainstream media said there was just a lack of evidence for this. Martin Guri says, last month's debate destroyed the carefully crafted myth of Joe Biden as an empathetic, intelligent, and resolute leader for the establishment that perpetrated this hoax. What comes next won't be pretty. Right, so Joe Biden was essentially propped up by the establishment, and then along comes the debate. Right, so in an effort unparalleled in our history, every American institution, from the prestige press to the digital platforms, from academia to the entertainment world, and the federal bureaucracy, was recruited to portray President Biden as the second coming of Abraham Lincoln. He was said to be caring, empathetic, a totally normal, everyday Joe who bonded easily with racial minorities, but was also serious about his duties, the dignified adult in the room, reliable ally who would never be manipulated by Vladimir Putin. His administration defeated the COVID pandemic, saved the economy, embraced migrants of all races, ended a forever war in Afghanistan, and protected Ukraine, Israel, and Hamas. Right? As for the president's age, he was old but wise. He was sharp in private, though a stutterer in public, and he was surrounded by the best and the brightest in any case. Nothing like this has been seen before. For the Democrats in power to spin the truth was predictable. The institutions of information and knowledge to debase themselves so completely on behalf of a political nonentity, Joe Biden, added to their crisis of authority by precipitating a depressing meltdown of integrity. Right? Establishment elites moved their minds permanently to Joe Biden, where this Joe Biden was an energetic leader and his policies were always successful. Right? We were told to ignore the evidence of our eyes and to salute. Joe Biden's actual appearances generated uncertainty and unease, but these were carefully staged and kept to a minimum. Here was the truth of the matter. Biden world functioned better without Joe Biden. He was, in fact, its greatest obstacle. And this fantastic universe erected around Joe Biden wasn't focused on the president, but on his fiercest antagonist. Donald Trump was the predicate of Biden world, its reason for existence. So as a moral and political abomination, Trump provided the rationale for establishment rule in perpetuity. Loathing of Trump in the highest places is no doubt sincere. That's not the point. If the former president had never existed, someone else would have been found to occupy the super villain slot. Saw this for a few months in 2023 where Ron DeSantis was put in this slot. So we had this imminent threat to democracy, and it required justification of extraordinary measures. The prime directive of Biden world has always been anything is licit if it helps defeat Trump. Could that include opening up space for assassination attempts on Donald Trump? Possibly. So we had protection against reality. That was the highest priority of Biden world. Whatever whisper of truth pierced the wall of fictions was ruthlessly attacked as the product of crazed and bigoted minds. So Special Prosecutor Robert Hur, who had the assignment of looking into Joe Biden's mishandling of classified documents, if he reports that he won't move forward with the case because Joe Biden is an elderly man with a poor memory, then Robert Hur must be a Trumpian tool. The video shows Joe Biden wandering off to nowhere. Then the video is a lie. It's all malicious disinformation. It's cheap fakes. It's just deranged conspiracy theories, right? And to strengthen the faith of Biden world, punishment had to be meted out to heretics. MAGA supporters were treated like domestic terrorists. Political opponents were prosecuted like criminals. An elaborate censorship apparatus was constructed to protect against offending opinions and factual discrepancies. Anything is licit if it helps to defeat Donald Trump. Right? That has been the perspective of our dominant elite and our dominant institutions. Now, why did the people around Joe Biden change their minds and challenge Donald Trump to a debate? Right? They had migrated to a fantasy universe. They had come to believe in their own comforting lies. truth had become the habitual enemy, something to shun in horror. So they dreamed that they could preserve Biden world by producing the real Joe Biden. Now, this debate, June 27, was a transcendental event. It was far more significant than anything that was said in it. So while Joe Biden gargled and mumbled, a ripping noise could be heard by those who listened closely, a sound like the rending of a veil, as the whole Gothic fortress of fantasies disintegrated, the replica vanished like a ghost, and 100 million Americans could suddenly behold the cruel struggles of a man tormented by a dying body and a dying mind. The shock of what we saw still lingers, not because it was surprising, but rather because it was so predictable and consistent with what we already knew. It was truth. We have grown used to lies. We witnessed in real time the unraveling of a colossal fraud and the end of Joe Biden's political life. There is no way forward for Joe Biden, although he is a vain and stubborn man, who may take outside intervention to persuade him of this. The media that once sheltered him is now competing to expose his frailties. The prime directive remains supreme, start Donald Trump, but Joe Biden now finds himself at the pointy end of that argument. He has fallen behind Trump, and in consequence, he has lost the New York Times. No Democratic politician can take that hit, remain a competitive candidate. What happens next is uncertain. The establishment, however, may not survive the public unmasking of its prurient fantasies. The magic has been lost, and with it the authority to anoint the next chief. The Democratic Party, long held together by its collective will to power, may shatter from a clash of personal ambitions. I see no reason to pity Joe Biden. He perpetrated a hoax on the American people, and he had the misfortune of being found out. The punishment will fit the crime: humiliation for heedless vanity. If he is forced to withdraw from the presidential contest, that will be all the world remembers of his brief tenure at the top. If Donald Trump regains the presidency in 2024, Joe Biden will end up detested by the very elites whose good opinion he has groveled all of his life to obtain. Failure this time will be fixed and final, like destiny itself. He will not bear the blow stoically. He'll spend whatever time remains to him as a 21st century of King Lear, fallen, baffled, victim of his own fatal misjudgments, an old man lost on the heath and railing at the storm.
We have people that right here, flat on the roof. It's much tougher than you went flat on the roof again.
Now, I should point out something here. There's a slight discrepancy, even though all of the news outlets are reporting about the same. Here, the security room disseminated info to the counter-sniper response team, and the addition. This is where the gunman was. He was positioned right here. If you saw the photos of him lying on the roof, he was right by this little connection right here between the two buildings. So he was sitting right here, and Trump was on the stage way over here. So they're saying that they saw him at 6:00.
Okay, let's get some more commentary.
CS team took the shot and all that kind of stuff. We had a very, very good conversation. And I said, is there anything else that you think would influence, the delay? And he goes, absolutely. Defund the police. Every police officer.
Right. Why did the counter snipers delay in taking out the would-be assassin of Donald Trump? Right. That's my number one question.
Across the country is hesitant to use force now. And that could be a major factor in this one. I don't know. I'm just suggesting that that's endemic. You know, if you sow into the police community this message that, you're overbearing, you obviously overuse force, then they're going to be hesitant to use it. We've already seen clear examples of officers dying because they didn't use the force that they were lawfully allowed to use. So this is going to be another issue that comes up. Who are we hiring? And I want to say it clear, Chuck, you and I have had this conversation. I was a Marine, I was a police officer, and I was a Secret Service agent and a Homeland Security agent. During all those tenures, I worked next to females that were incredible. They were gifted, they were strong, they were fit. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't be on the job. I'm saying that qualified people should be on the job. We should never say, oh, well, only this third is reserved for only these people. And I think across the agencies, we're seeing this compromise in mission because we're not necessarily hiring the right people.
Yeah, that's right. So you talk about defund the police, but also this DEI initiative where Kimberly Cheadle is saying, I will only hire women for 1/3 of the force. And that might very necessarily mean that there's a 6'5", 300-pound linebacker guy out there who got passed over, even though he was eminently more qualified, just because he didn't have the right plumbing. And this is a huge problem, huge problem. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of talk on social media about some of those female Secret Service agents that were, well, let's just say, not really up to the task. I was watching another.
Look, the differences between men and women don't come down to mere plumbing, just like the differences between various racial groups don't come down to skin pigmentation. The plumbing and the skin pigmentation are clues to broader, wider, and more significant differences. All right, let's welcome Stephen James to the show. Stephen, what's going on, man?
Yo, I was just writing. I'm backstage. I didn't know if you'd see it, Luke. How are you doing today?
I am blessed. How are you?
Not bad. I don't have long, but I thought I'd just hop on. I was just listening to the guy speaking there. One of the points I wanted to make when I came on is I'm very frustrated by this line that people are taking, which is, I'm not saying that women can't do the job, okay? Because I think that this just feeds the problem even more, okay? Yes, you can have some ladies doing like regular Secret Service jobs, but not the close protection team. I just don't buy it, okay? I just don't. No, there's no, for instance, boxing regulator in the world who would sanction a fight between a man and a woman of the same weight. So who are we kidding when this close protection, like whatever it is, a six-man team who walks with Trump wherever he goes, who are responsible for him on the podium, who are responsible for him as he's walking amongst crowds. This team who has to disarm people, in most circumstances, it's probably going to be physical disarmament, grabbing them by the throat or something like this, grabbing them by the arms, taking them to the ground. This should be big, strong men, without a doubt. So.
Yes, without a doubt. But the reason that we are so free to state this obvious truth is that we have nothing to lose. All right, we're not gonna give up prestigious positions. We're not gonna give up wealth and honor. We're not gonna give up beautiful sexual relationships by stating the obvious truth. Everyone that I was playing who was much more convoluted in their approach, they had more to lose than we did. So one of the virtues of our lack of success in life is that we can be free to say the blunt truth.
Yes, I get the point. It just really frustrates me as I hear them sat there attempting to give this this truth about the fact that it has to be somebody competent, and but yet they're still walking the fence line really carefully. Anyway, that frustrated me. The other thing I wanted to mention, Luke, is I didn't tell you actually the whole truth when I spoke to you before, in the immediate aftermath of the Trump assassination attempt, because one of the things that happened is I wanted to say that I was watching it live. You remember I told you that I had it paused in a tab. Well, my instinct was to lie and say that I had been watching it live. And I had to stop myself from doing it because I don't know why. But I wanted to I wanted to be part of it. I remember telling you this. And so I was going to say I was watching it live in the tweet that I made, and I stopped myself at the last moment from making this fundamental, incorrect, on the record thing, and what it made me think about is the nature of where conspiracy theories develop from. And I imagine lots of it is from false witness accounts of people who are just wanting to be part of the moment, get carried away in the excitement of something in a weird, narcissistic way, wanting to share in it. Because from what I understand, there's lots of people, for instance, who, when 9/11 happened, claimed to have seen the first plane hit the tower, either on TV or in real life. And then it comes out after the fact, well, nobody saw the first plane hitting the tower on the TV. So all these witness accounts are, people who declared this are either lying or mistaken. And so I imagine that this is like, it's not lying. Well, it is lying, but it's people's, I don't know, misrepresentation of something that, it's like you want to give like the essence of the truth, but you also want to be part of it more.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely touching on something, and it's a Rorschach's test. It's a giveaway. When you encounter someone who exaggerates their own significance, you know that you're dealing with a fragile person who finds the reality of his own insignificance unbearable, and therefore is trying to create a scaffold of significance where there is no viable foundation for that significance. So someone earning $1 million a year has no need to make up a story of his own significance, generally speaking. All right, someone who's a professional athlete, someone who's dating, having sex regularly with a gorgeous woman, someone who has an esteemed position in his community has much less need to erect a false sense of significance because they have a real significance. But those of us who don't have that real significance that comes with being a star, we much more keenly feel that need to create a significance because the unbearable nature of our own significance is just so painful.
Yeah, no, I agree with you entirely about that. Yeah. It's like I wanted to report on it whilst being part of the story, and I had to pull myself back at the last moment. And you've been playing people have now been reporting on it in the aftermath, and each of them are wanting to give like their own super insightful thing on it. And so this is even now breeding, like you are identifying as you're watching, oh, this guy's giving some important information here and some rubbish. He's talking rubbish as well. And it's quite obvious that many of these people are just like they're very excited about it and wanting to get the next angle. And we live in the age of like engagement and impressions on Twitter and on social media. And so I don't think that there's this thing about whether are these really bad lies? Do these people believe them or not? Or do they think like they're living in the spirit of the truth? They're looking for the truth, even if they're telling some porcupines along the way.
Yeah, I mean, when I was from, about age 14 to 22, I exaggerated my sexual prowess because
I think we've all done that, Luke, to be fair.
I didn't have any. And then I finally, at age 22, I finally started having regular sex. And a few weeks in, my girlfriend said, I feel so insecure because you've been with so many girls before me. And I said, I was lying. You're my first.
Oh, and how did she take that? How did she?
Oh, she found that adorable, and she treasured it. But like I remember in 8th grade, I had a classmate who was already having sexual interactions with high school girls. He didn't need to exaggerate his sexual prowess because he was having the real thing. So people who have the real thing, I think they just have much less of a need to exaggerate their own accomplishments. Like it's a real giveaway of someone finding the reality of their life unbearable.
Yeah, this is true. When people are speaking about it, they're not doing it, are they? Really?
Yeah.
It's projection. What's the phrase? Bullshit walks and money talks, bullshit walks. People who are speaking about something, they're not doing it. Yeah, you're right about that.
I remember when I interviewed Andy Nowicki, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, he'd come out with a novel. It was kind of inspired by the COVID pandemic, and the interview didn't go so well. Andy and I started clashing, and then afterwards, I just was seized with what I think is an insight that for people who are losing at life, one of the principal ways that they comfort themselves in our sphere is that they are convinced that at least they see through the bullshit, right? They're failing at life, but at least they see through the bullshit, while their peers, who may well be less intelligent than them, but who have marriages, who have children, who have mortgages, who have have a six-figure income, well, these guys are just careerists, right? They don't have the strength that I have to see through the bullshit. Like I just notice in myself this constant need to manufacture an angle by which I am an awesome man.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that there is this character that you say that when you find, certainly when you get into distant politics and you start getting red pill, you do really like pat yourself on the back as like a truth discoverer, and and you may be discovering these things, whether they're true or not. You're discovering them on the internet, and you're spending all your time doing that. But what you're not doing is maybe building the most successful life around yourself. But you look at other people who are normies, and we come up with these derogatory terms for them: NPCs, normies, blue-pilled people, and we say we're not like them, and we don't say we're not like them because we're poor and we are disenfranchised. We say we're not like them because they're closed-minded, and we figured it all out. Yeah, you really are right about that. You know,
I mean, a lot of my friends have PhDs, and say a friend who specializes in genocide, right? They are particularly eager to apply the label genocide to all sorts of things going on around them, because they're trying to manufacture jobs, income, and prestige for themselves. And the other friends in mental health, they're eager to promote an expansion of definitions of mental health so that they can have more clients and power and prestige. I mean, we're an incredibly self-interested, self-deluded bunch. I mean, even fairly successful people. I mean, even Joe Biden, president of the United States, but he is burning with anger that Barack Obama told him to not run for president in 2016 and to allow, Hillary Clinton to run instead. And so he's burning with anger and resentment about that. So he's not going to listen to the Biden team about how he should drop out now. So, and of course, Donald Trump, just to a ludicrous extent, takes things personally.
Yeah, it is nuanced though, isn't it? Like I said at the start there, because we also can see how people hold back and walk the fence of this thing. So there is something to becoming, whatever it is, red pill, more aware about politics, more aware about these things. Us who see through the bullshit, Luke. I mean, there is some actuality, some realness to what we see in other people who do maintain prestige, who do tread the social graces carefully and manage to maintain their positions of authority and power, who don't get cancelled. We're right to notice it.
Yeah, but it seems to always, it seems 99% of the time that I encounter that attitude, it is accompanied by social dysfunction. So you would think that someone who really does see through the BS, right, common sense would suggest that that person would be more adept at navigating reality, and yet it almost always seems to be accompanied by below average ability to navigate reality. So that then makes me question whether people really are seeing through the bullshit, when it almost always is part and parcel of a dysfunctional, unhappy, unsuccessful, isolated life.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that there's definitely no there's no positive benefit to a life. There's no obvious gain from learning any of this stuff anyway. It certainly doesn't propel you from mediocrity into a life of success, does it? Have you ever found anyone who became red-pilled and wealthy?
No, no, not even close. It's bizarre. They all tell me that they quit 150,000 a year jobs because they read Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique, and now they've lost their wife, they've lost their family, they've lost their connections with friends. They are exiled from everything that they once valued, and then now surrounded by people who deny that the Holocaust happened. it just seems just to a shocking degree that I did not expect in 2013, 2014, 2015. It seems to always be accompanied by a dysfunctional life, and that is not what I anticipated.
No, you're onto something there. Look, the last thing I wanted to mention was Elliott's dinner date. I heard him talking about this when he was on the show the other day. Now I get it wasn't the one who he wants. He wants the younger version.
Yes,
but it's interesting. He said there was a moment during that dinner where I forget exactly what it was, but she said something like, "It's a shame that they missed Trump," or something like that, and he was aghast. It was. From that moment on, he couldn't look at her the same way, and he wanted to leave, and he lost all respect for her. And it made me realise that how many occasions, Luke, must we make the same mistake going around, and where we give our opinions, and people who are liberalised, like we give opinions like I've just given you how a man should be doing the job, or that men don't have men have penises and women don't, or things like this, and other people silently dismiss us because of their liberal priors, and how many opportunities we have forsaken through doing this and not realized it because our normality is also what we just assumed the other person also to hold.
Yeah, I remember this. I'm a breast man, so there was this busty porn star who wanted to seduce me, and we were going to end the evening in her jacuzzi, and she began our evening by us going out to dinner, and she ordered a ham salad, and even though she had big breasts and she was beautiful and she had a college degree in English literature. From that point on, I could not do anything with her. And so we had dinner, we went back to the jacuzzi, everything was set for her to seduce me, and I could not go through with it because I didn't want to be rendered impotent by her eating ham, but it just happened to me. It just happened to me. I couldn't go through with the deed simply because she'd eaten ham.
Wow. Yeah, and this was after your conversion, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Although you're vegetarian all your life anyway, aren't you?
Yeah. It's so it just took away. I mean, there were just numerous times times when women would try to seduce me, and there would be something that would just put me off, and I just couldn't go through with it. I was just physically not capable of doing the deed because of some expression, something they just one thing would just burn that bridge to intimacy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I often think though that women often try to mirror what, particularly in when they're into somebody. So if they're looking for romance, if they're interested in you, they attempt to mirror what they think you might actually approve of, or what you might actually like. And I was thinking about this situation again with Elliott. In many ways, I wonder if Elliott gives off the typical liberal San Franciscan hippie or whatever type vibe, and if this lady was doing that, she could have been doing that to impress Elliott, coming out with this outrageous statement at the dinner table, and she thought that Elliott would have been turned on by it or something. Ooh, what a thing to say, about Trump, because the discourse is, of course, we all hate Trump, but we all want rid of him. And she could have been doing that to get in Elliott's pants, and instead it drove him out the door.
Oh, I remember another woman. She was a respectable woman. She was a good woman. I met her in synagogue, but it was during a time when I was very much following Dennis Prager, and Dennis Prager would just pour out his contempt at people who watched a lot of TV. And so I asked this beautiful woman who was a great fit for me physically, and she had a wonderful sarcastic sense of humor. And I asked her how much TV she watched, and she said, about 8 hours a day. And I only realized in retrospect that she was just pulling my leg and being sarcastic. But I could not date her because she said she watched 8 hours of TV a day. But she was just playing around. But because I was so focused on the Dennis Prager hero system that she was immediately rendered, a member of the out group for me, even though she was a beautiful Persian Jewess, simply because she said something sarcastic and I didn't get it.
Yeah, you missed out, Luke. You missed out. Probably low-level Asperger's, really, that, isn't it?
I mean, it's the insane veneration of a particular hero system that I was using to provide myself a foundation because I didn't have a real foundation of normal sense of ease with myself and with other people. And so I was trying to construct a foundation for a good life, built upon bits and pieces that I took from Dennis Prager. I was trying to build myself up by holding to this elevated morality system. I was trying to hold on to myself, even though at the time I was just immersed in reporting on the porn industry. And so I felt myself hurtling downhill, in very dangerous ways. And so I was trying to clasp on to something to retain my sanity.
Yeah. Hey, how many people would you say that put on this exterior of, walking all the correct opinions? How many people would you say that like behind closed doors, you've realized actually don't, hold to all the airs and graces of society? Is it
a great deal?
lot?
I mean, as much as any other hypocrisy. So many liberal intellectuals I know, say highly disparaging things about black people in private. Like they'll talk about their frustration with teaching some, unintelligent black students.
So I guess the lesson would be then, like for instance, when I'm watching these guys that you're playing who are walking up to the line and saying, look, they're walking up to that line and saying the truth that is acceptable. I shouldn't take away, I'm frustrated with you, you liberal cuck. I should take away from that, you're dog whistling to me what you actually think, shouldn't I?
Well, I think you should take away that they're doing the best they can in a particular circumstance. So the more prestigious your position, the more you have to adhere to careful critical discourse, right? The quicker you'll be removed from your position. And so the more they have to lose, the more careful they have to be. And so one has to recognize their position and how they're doing the best they can in a challenging position. And if we were in their position, we would not be more frank than they are. Like, we wouldn't throw away our marriage and our job and our career and our social standing just to give blunt truth about female Secret Service agents.
No, we wouldn't. Interesting about Trump security as well. Just before I go, I was looking up. I had this vague memory from 2016 about Trump's own private security, that this was a clash. You may even have been talking about it way back, like, I don't know, just after Trump was elected. I can't remember. But so I was looking up. There's lots of articles about Trump's private security that he obviously had, being like a billionaire, New York real estater. And apparently when he when he became president-elect, there was this clash. He wanted to keep his private security team, and it was run by a guy called Keith Schiller.
Yes.
And
the Secret Service hates that. They hated that. They always resented that.
Yeah, and so there's dozens of articles online from 2016 saying what a terrible idea this was for Trump, how he was endangering the president, he was endangering his life, it was a reckless decision and everything. And I'm thinking now, Trump should have that private security that he'd built over decades through loyalty and service, and he could, I imagine he was ruthless as an employer. Probably a bit like he was on The Apprentice in real life, but I know that was a media image. But this team that he built up, he could have that now on the ground with him at these events, and not by the looks of it, they'd be much more probably reliable than the Secret Service in many ways.
Yeah, and the Secret Service made a convincing point that Keith Schiller would often get in the way when they're trying to accomplish things, and he was actually endangering Trump's security. And given the complicated nature of reality, I'm sure that was at times true. So at times, having your private security would be to your advantage, and other times it would be to your disadvantage. It's not like there's one definitive answer to this.
No, it's true. And I think you've probably hit on something. You're the only person I've heard talking about it, reporting on that Trump probably played into this somewhat. So his like reckless use of Secret Service or something. And,
yes.
His own decisions, probably foolishness, his overuse or, to protect like his own assets and stuff. I imagine this is probably the case, and he's probably reaping he's probably sowing what he's reaped earlier on, and
reaping what he's sown. He's reaping the whirlwind from his own selfishness, venality, and he's just not very good at running things, and he didn't do much to improve the Secret Service when he had power, and he denied proper security to Joe Biden when Trump had the power to do that. So now, Biden, not that Joe Biden deliberately ordered this, but it wouldn't be surprising if Joe Biden's team, thinks turnaround's fair play.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're all white, as
Yes.
I mentioned earlier. Not just Biden's, but also Trump's. So yes, Trump's got some of the fat girls, but they're all white still. So that is interesting.
Yeah, Trump does not like the obese.
No. He should just have tall men around his close protection team. This really frustrates me. Why this? It's so obvious. Anyway, I've got to run, Luke. Thanks.
Okay, take care, man, bro. Take care. Bye.
Okay.
Bye. So I know a lot of people in my life who tried to follow Dennis Prager's advice, because Dennis Prager is incredibly charismatic. Like, if you walk into a room and Dennis Prager's there, you will feel drawn to him. When you're in a room and Dennis Prager walks in, the air seems to change. For every year Dennis Prager went to grade school, he was elected class president, right? There was just an aura about him. And so he makes you feel important. He makes you feel like he's giving you something important, right? He's the definition of charisma. And so many people are emotionally moved by Dennis Prager, and then they try to translate his advice into their life. And often it's just absolutely disastrous, such as you should communicate the tough things that you can't say to your partner, do it in writing. Well, sometimes that's a good idea, but sometimes that's a terrible idea. And also, your own degree of ease with yourself and ease with other people will enable you or disempower you from appropriately integrating Dennis Prager's advice. Like, whenever anyone gives advice, obviously there will be circumstances where it will be useful and other circumstances where it will be a detriment.
Angle that somebody filmed from the bleachers behind the president as he was speaking. And then when the shooting started, one of the female Secret Service agents actually tossed her gun right off the stage. Her firearm went flying right off the stage, and she lost control of it and had to run back down the stairs and pick it up as they were bringing Trump down. Another angle, that famous photograph now showing Trump with his fist raised, he's visible in the photo because the Secret Service agent, the female that's trying to block him with her body, only comes up about to here on him, and isn't actually covering his head.
Okay, let's
because
get
she wasn't.
Kip back to the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, Wild Man, just checking in with you. I was wanting to offer something to you for your consideration. When you said you were having some performance issues there, with women, you know, I found along the way that the image of a perfect woman is something I constructed. That poor girl didn't have anything to do with it. It was something that was solely on me and something that was built up inside of me. But what I would think is maybe just all of a sudden, subconsciously you realize this isn't it. She's not it. I had this image in my mind, and she's not living up to it. And in the same way that you go out there and procreate in a young man, as a young man, and you subconsciously don't realize you're just trying to have a fun time, but there's a job to do. Your genes are trying to get out there into the world, and you don't even realize what's going on. Hell, that could have been the same thing going on with that performance anxiety, where your manhood is going, nope, you did the interview process, but it was wrong. You were wrong about this one, and I'm gonna make a call for you and save the day here.
Yeah, I think often our intuition, the body reacts in ways completely differently from how our mind reacts. So, my mind said, bang this slut, but my body just couldn't go through with it. I mean, and that's happened to me, I don't know, probably 50 different women. Like my mind said I should go bang this slut, but my body couldn't.
Right. I like myself, I was gifted in the art of persuasion when I was a young man, but at the same time, a problem would arise whenever I would speak to a group that was above, say, 20 people. I remember I went to a company called TFI, Thomasville Furniture Industries, out in High Point, North Carolina, and was given a talk to them. And I broke out in like a full-bodied sweat. And the only thing I could say is their eyeballs were like laser beams on me. You know what I mean? And I felt that seemed to happen whenever it was above like a group that you could manage. Anytime it got to the mob size or larger, I just couldn't do it without breaking out in flop sweat, just profuse flop sweat. So you could see on one level that could be something that separates the men from the boys. I may be one in 1,000 as far as being able to teach people persuasion, but you got to, when it comes to a large group, maybe you got to be the 1 in 100,000, to be able to get that done.
And if you don't have an internal image of what you're deserving. So I know I've had many significant opportunities in my life, and I simply didn't feel deserving, and so I sabotaged them.
Also, in persuasion, I used to tell people could smell that desperation on you. That's the same with the battle of the sexes too. People can smell that desperation. It's interesting how that stuff goes, because you would think someone would get sharper, as he got more desperate, but no, you get more clumsy. It's actually the opposite. Seem to get more clumsy as the cold streak goes on and on.
Yeah, that's why the most important reputation you can have is with yourself, right?
Yeah.
You will not allow yourself to achieve more success than you believe you deserve. And so until you're at ease with yourself, you're going to be severely limited no matter what happens to you.
Right. I wanted to push back a little bit from the earlier conversation you were having with the fellow, where you talked about, navigating reality, and the people who claim to say they know truth with a capital T seem to be the king of social dysfunction, that sort of thing. And I don't know. I can only speak for myself, so anecdotal of one person, but what is sanity in an insane society? I'm more from the school of Terence McKenna, who said that culture is not your friend, So if you've seen it for the horror that it is or whatever, you can just do the best you can, because in my mind, let's say the people that are playing along, I guess that's an art. I guess that's an ability. So, or it could be something as simple as they say ignorance is bliss. But I can't play along just in the way I have to really watch myself when I'm socializing out here, walking my dogs at this liberal arts college, because sometimes they get into subjects that I really want to fire back, but I don't, because I kind of look at them as neighbors, because I got to walk my dogs up here the next day or whatever. So I do a lot of agreeing to disagree, but
I could be wrong, but I honestly think you're lying to yourself. I think you found yourself in a certain spiral, and then you're coming up with intellectual reasons why it's virtuous. I don't believe that you would wish the current state of your life on anyone that you cared about. I don't believe that you would wish this on your kids.
When can you be a little bit more specific? You're talking about maybe social isolation?
Yeah, it sounds to me like you are socially isolated, and I don't believe that you would genuinely wish this for your own children. I don't believe that you would genuinely wish this for anyone that you loved, that you found yourself socially isolated, and then you constructed intellectual reasons for why that was virtuous.
Right. Well, that's why a smart person can't come off of it sometimes. You know what I mean? Because they can build themselves up something internally that makes sense. But I guess for me, I've only felt lonely one time in my life. I remember it was my 19th birthday. I was out in 29 Palms, California, and all of a sudden I just miss people. You know, all the people that I loved were 2,600 miles away from me. And it had a profound effect on me that one day, that one evening, you know. But I hadn't felt.
So give me a major way that you spend your time, and then I'll ask you a question based on that.
My daily routine is very boring. I get up, go to the gym, usually just consists of swimming a mile, get done swimming a mile, come home, get the dogs, walk them for about 45 minutes. Usually it's around lunchtime after that. And then, you know, somewhere along the way, I might listen to you. I'll do some studying, read a book, whatever. But that's about it. You know, beyond that, it's going out and buying or buying a TV at a bank. You know, it's business transactions.
Okay, let me focus here. So let's just take one part of your routine there that I can particularly relate to: reading a book. So I get the strength, the power, and the desire to read a book substantially from my ability then to share it with people I care about. Meaning, I get to talk about it on a show, or I get to write an essay on it, or I get to talk about it with certain friends. It's those connections that create much of the meaning that goes with reading a book. And if I say go visit Australia and I go for a beautiful walk on the beach, it is my ability to share or to describe that walk on the beach that gives it heightened meaning. If it's just for myself, all these activities have considerably drained meaning. But when I can share them with people I care about, then the meaning develops much more intensity. That's how I experience these activities. When you engage in the activities you described, is the meaning that you get from them just for yourself? Is that filling you up, or do you think about your ability to share whatever's going on with someone who you care about, and that's where the meaning comes from?
I believe we bring meaning to life. You know, that's what I believe.
So you get your own meaning. You don't need anyone else to back it up.
No, sir.
Okay, so I'm skeptical, but you may be right. So Joe Biden has stepped down. That's he's just made a statement.
I hate to hear that. I hate to hear that.
Yeah.
I thought he would be an easy mark, and this gives the machine, the State Department, and all the apparatus the chance to go ahead and crank up and do a new sales job with somebody else. You know, and if they didn't catch on to the big picture with the way Trump was treated, you know, from 2015 to now, they're never going to catch on. That's where I went back to you before and told you that I just felt like the world is full of hypnotics, unfortunately. And that's not going to change. But for some reason, the amount of hypocrisy that went on with Trump, it kind of took the mask off. But they're just going to think, you know, that's just Trump. That's just this one thing. That's just isolated. Nobody will ever consider the scope, you know, of it all.
Yeah. So what makes you happy? Where do you get your happiness?
Like I told you before, I really care a lot about truth. Now, the unfortunate thing is I got to reach out and talk to you. I don't know if you're in California today or Australia,
Yeah.
but I don't have access to a lot of high IQ folks, you know, here locally. But that wouldn't have changed whether I lived here on this lonely mountain or where I was before. You know, if some people are just trapped in the culture, and you sound like an alien if you talk to them anything different, you know. And people don't need to be, unless they're willing to go all the way, you really don't want to shake them out of it a little bit, because like you say, a lot of people that are, let's just, for lack of a better word, in the matrix, if they're in that and it's working for them, maybe it's best that they need to stay in it, you know. Maybe true, but because maybe you talk to them a little bit, but you see that they're really attached to this, you know, they're really attached to all this. Well, okay, you know, you can't really do much at that point. So in our earlier discussion, I had told you, just kind of hinted to you, that I thought sort of the end is nigh for America, and I don't necessarily think that's going to be global thermonuclear destruction with Russia. I would think that it's more of a financial cliff more than anything else, or some sort of a national divorce, because I think it's been too long. The whatever you want to call it, neuro-linguistic programming, or linguistic framing techniques, or persuasion, it's deep. And I think we've reached the point where people in Tennessee, they would just as soon not live under the same type laws as the people in California or Illinois or New York State. You get what I'm saying? I think there's that much of a divide, but I really think the biggest problem is more the financial cliff. So, you know, unfortunately, I do spend part of my time like having to be drawn back into the world and think about money. If you'll think about when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a few other Democratic socialists won election back in November 2018, that worried me. You know, I went out and bought 80 ounces of gold. That was just under $100,000. And, you know, that gold was $1,200 an ounce then, and I think it's close to $2,500 an ounce now. It ain't the gold that's more valuable. It's the US dollars in my pocket that's less valuable. And that's just been the case ever since you were born, Luke. Here in America, we've lost like 97, 98% of the purchasing power of our dollar. And guys like me, who are natural hustlers, are able to overcome that. But I think that's just going to be too much for the average guy. And I think that's the main reason why billionaires are building bunkers all over America. What say you?
I say that provides that perspective provides excitement for you from a life that's otherwise largely devoid of excitement. I could be wrong. Do you get excited by the prospect of apocalypse, and do you get a sustenance from your ability to see through the bullshit?
No, I mean, do I think I'm going to come in and pick through the bones and make a mint? No, I'm not even motivated by that. I'm trying to just preserve what I had already made in a previous life. You know what I mean? So I'm not the apocalyptic aspect of it. No, I'm not. I don't like it at all. I don't think I'm necessarily smarter than anybody else. I think maybe people just have other things on their mind, or maybe they don't want to dwell on such things. But hell, you saw yourself with Trump, for example, what the State Department is capable of. And, you know, you probably thought in 2016, 2017, 2018, when he and his people are being screwed with on social media or whatever, you think it's just some blue-haired person out in Silicon Valley that's just got a political axe to grind in her little cubicle. Nobody considers until maybe 2019, 2020, when he starts getting kicked all off of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Even then, I think people think nobody's telling them to do that. They would have no idea that their own State Department has a hand in that. They think that's just some jack off over at Twitter and Facebook. So I don't know. I don't think it necessarily gives me more meaning. I just think that truth is important, you know, much the same way that truth was important to a guy like Andrew Breitbart, and it was important to David Irving, and it was important to a guy like Jared Taylor, and it's important to a guy like Charles Murray. And you're right. But take Charles Murray. He's already said he's the only PhD. He and his wife are the only PhDs living in his town. You know, does that make him some sort of a social dysfunctional person? You see the way the world treats him. You see the way the world reflects on him. He goes to a college. They shout him down. They call him everything but a son of a gun. And all he's doing is going out there trying to tell the truth. So what should I do? Should I get out and do a podcast that nobody's going to watch? I don't know. Should I read a book that nobody's going to read? I don't know. I've got probably something to say on that, but at this point, it's okay for me to just talk to the few people that maybe clued in on stuff like this. But that doesn't make me, I don't know, you just have to explain social dysfunction, because now you're getting down to stuff, or are you living to work or working to live? You know, now you're getting down to stuff like that, to where what's it all about?
Okay, I gotta run for today, so we'll definitely continue this, Kip. But I would explain a person who's socially dysfunctional if he doesn't look forward to his life, right? To me, it's equivalent to being unhappy. But if you look forward to the day ahead, the week ahead, the month ahead, then I think you're functional, right? A form of life that doesn't want to live is not functional. So as long as you look forward to living, as long as you look forward to what's on your plate for today and tomorrow and the rest of the week, then my perspective is that you're functional. But
I'll tell you this, I would call myself, what you're describing, I do feel that way from time to time for maybe the 3 to 4 weeks around the winter solstice. I do find myself getting down during the times when we have the least amount of sunlight, you know. But other than that, no.
Okay, let's continue this another time, Kip.
That's great, man.
Okay, take care, man.
Have fun, Luke. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, so I think I was one of the first people to predict that Joe Biden would drop out, and I used a particular set of tools. All right, I used one tool in particular to get to this perspective, and it was a derivation of something that I learned from philosophy professor John M. Doris, how often the situation will have more effect on our behavior than any innate personality characteristics. And I then transmuted that perspective on moral character to the political, and I saw that the power of the situation would often, in politics, outweigh all other considerations, such as tradition, such as law, such as legality, such as bylaws, such as ways of doing things. Right? What Joe Biden is doing is completely unprecedented. It has no precedent. But I saw that the situation he was in was absolutely untenable, and so that's why I announced July 2nd, right, that Joe Biden was going to drop out, because the desperate nature of his situation would prevail over all precedent. So this is what I stated July 2nd, and it's now coming true. G'day, mate 40 here. So one of the least attractive traits is helplessness. Unnecessary learned helplessness. I find it very unattractive, and it seems to be dominating the majority opinion in American politics right now. That it's just inevitable that Joe Biden will become the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States. And Joe Biden is manifestly unfit to be President of the United States. Right? He made that clear last Thursday night in his disastrous performance at a debate with Donald Trump. The other thing that kills me about the majority pundit reaction is that Joe Biden is perfectly capable of operating as President of the United States. He's just not capable of campaigning for President of the United States. So Joe Biden apparently has a hard time getting going before 10 a.m. and he has a hard time operating after 4 p.m. So he has about 6 hours a day where he can do work. And this is acceptable for President of the United States. If we get into a nuclear crisis, only the President of the United States can make the call whether or not we launch nuclear weapons. That can't be devolved onto his staff. So what you hear from the Biden team is that he has a highly competent staff, and when you're voting for Joe Biden, you're also voting for his highly competent staff. But this is the same side who's been making the argument for the past 5 years that democracy is on the ballot, and that voting for Joe Biden is a vote for democracy. But people didn't vote for Joe Biden's staff. right? He clearly has not been up to the office of President of the United States since he took office, right? He was saved from having to campaign by COVID. Like a frail old man who had that vacant, checked-out stare back in 2018. And now the cognitive decline has apparently become particularly precipitous over the past few months in 2024. And then here's another element of the learned helplessness that seems to dominate much of American political discourse among elites right now, and that is, well, by all the rules, all the procedures, by all the precedents, according to the bylaws, Joe Biden is going to become the Democratic nominee for president because the laws say that, because he won the delegates, and if he's determined to run as the Democratic nominee for president, no one can stop him. Right? So this is the legal perspective. So what's more powerful, right? Is it the situation or is it the law? I contend to you that the situation has more power than the law. But the dominant discourse among elites with regard to Joe Biden right now is that the law says that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president. But when following the law results in a suicidal choice, right? Running Joe Biden for president of the United States is a suicidal choice, not just for the Democrats, but also for the country. The United States of America is in peril right now because a senile old man who is checked out much of the time mentally and just cognitively not. So I don't believe it's possible for Joe Biden to stay on as president of the United States, right? He is also going to have to resign from that position. There is in the office of president of the United States. So I'm a big respecter of law and order. I love the law, but there are things that are more important than the law, such as survival and the health and protection of your people. And so America is an incredibly individualist country, and as a result, in individualist countries, it's probably the most individualist country, everything has to be negotiated, right? You have to negotiate more things in more depth in the United States than any other country of which I'm aware, because it's so individualist, and therefore there's so little common feeling. Right? You definitely have to negotiate far more of life in the United States compared to 100 years ago. I made the point, if you need to fight to survive on the Sabbath, then you should absolutely fight. And so you can't just check out from your responsibilities by saying, oh, it's the Sabbath. Sabbath prohibits us from doing work. Work includes picking up weapons. We can't protect ourselves because God said so. He has to find support for his narrative. Right? If he can't find any support for his narrative. Right, talking about Joe Biden, but it's true for all of us. We have to find support for our own narrative about our life and about the world. If we can't find any support from other people for our narrative, we're going to be lost. Among the people that he respects, right? Then it will be increasingly difficult to hang on to his narrative. I'll give you an example. I am a convert to Orthodox Judaism. If, when I encountered Orthodox Jews, I went to Dublin in an Orthodox synagogue, said, we don't count you as Jewish, we won't count you as a minion, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for me to maintain the narrative that I'm an Orthodox Jew. Right? My narratives depend upon getting some support from other people. We all depend on other people for support for our narratives. It requires increasing amounts of strength to maintain your narrative in opposition to other people's narratives. And Joe Biden depends upon narrative support. Yeah, you may have.
Okay, let's
turn to
Fox News chief political analyst Brit Hume, somebody who's covered Washington for decades, reacting to this earthquake in American politics. Brit, your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a case of the president making peace with the reality that he couldn't win. The support was ebbing away from him. The donations, as Brett Baird has pointed out, were beginning to dry up. Support for him among major leaders within his own party had slipped away from him. And obviously, in addition to that, the polling was negative, very bad. His pride, I think, is what kept this decision open for as long as it did. But I think when we look back on the history of this time, Mike, it will be believed by nearly everybody that this outcome became inevitable once that debate happened, and he did so poorly in it.
Does it sting even more, Brit, when you consider that Pelosi, Schumer, people he served with for decades, were kind of leading the charge against him?
I'm sure it does, and I'm sure it has. He's a proud man and at times a stubborn man. And these people had been his allies, and no doubt, as Kevin Cork was suggesting, he'd done things for them, and they actually for him as well. And for him to be abandoned as he was by them must have stung him very much, and perhaps caused him to dig in his heels for as long as he did. But this result, I think, in the fullness of time, will be seen as inevitable. He really couldn't go on. Now the question will arise, as I guess Brett suggested, that as to whether people start saying, well, look, if he's not well enough to campaign for re-election, how is it that he's well enough to serve out his term? And that's an interesting question. and that may be hard. And also, of course, we have this messy-looking process that the Democrats are trying to wamp up, kind of on the on short notice, to create something that will look like a legitimate nominating process. It is the case that if there's no nominee or the nominee drops out, the delegates are free to vote their conscience under the rules of the Democratic Party. But remember, these are Biden delegates. They were chosen and elected to run to be delegates for the purpose of supporting Joe Biden. So where their support will go is anybody's guess. I guess it could be wide open. We could have it. We could actually have, Mike, for the first time in many, many cycles, an open convention. Imagine that.
If Democrats try to go around the sitting vice president, does that create a massive fracture in their party?
So I also remember it was conventional wisdom that only Kamala Harris will get the Democrat nomination if Joe Biden drops out. And again, I use that same analysis, the power of the situation. All right, if Kamala Harris is overwhelmingly seen as unable to defeat Donald Trump, then even though all precedent and bylaws will suggest it's got to be Kamala Harris, no, I believe I suggested back July 2nd that you'll have, in all likelihood, an open convention because effectively the situation demands it. Reality demands it. When you go up against reality, reality always wins. So when you see law against reality, when you see morality against reality, when you see precedent against reality, right, reality always wins.
Well, I think it would depend on who ends up winning to some extent, but I think she looks like the obvious choice. She's vice president. She is someone who was chosen by him, and also technically speaking, I think, Mike, when the delegates voted, they were voting for a ticket, and it was Biden-Harris. So she would be, one would imagine, the odds-on favorite to be the nominee, and it would be hard, I think, for these delegates to turn their back on a woman of color. And I think that's a choice the party would have to make. The problem for them, of course, is that she has shown great weakness in the polling, and might not give the Democrats much of a better chance than they'd have had with Biden. Although Biden's senility was so screamingly obvious that it seems to me that he was basically crippled as a candidate.
We've heard talk in recent days, Brit, about the possibility of a mini primary. It is July 21st of an election year. Is there any time for that?
Well, there's some time, and presumably, if people step forward and run, there has to be some kind of competition. It wouldn't actually be a primary because we wouldn't have voters voting. We would have people that had been voted for as delegates being the audience for this little mini campaign done on a very foreshortened schedule.
Final thoughts, Brit, in terms of what this means to American politics. Usually these conventions are kind of pageants, if you will, for a particular party. It sounds like this may have some real practical politics taking place on the floor.
Yeah, this will be a convention more like the old ones when delegates showed up and they were heavily, party regulars, and you wouldn't know for sure who the nominee was going to be until the votes were taken. There have been conventions, I guess back in 1920, there was one that went to something like 100 ballots, and so that kind of thing has happened in the past. We haven't seen anything like that in many, many years. And Mike, where you're sitting and anchoring this broadcast right now, you're a witness to history, buddy. What we've seen in the last couple of weeks is like something we didn't expect. We live in turbulent times, and now we're living in really turbulent times.
Amazing. Brit Hume, grateful to have your analysis, your decades of experience during the...
And got a great comment on Twitter by Stephen Miller. Every single important job Kamala's ever had has been handed to her.
This breaking news, historic breaking news on this Sunday. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the analysis, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's go back to my colleague, Kevin Cork in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Kevin, your thoughts as President
happens, or some people will probably push for the convention. The other thing that I noticed here is that very quickly we were starting to get statements, Mike, from vulnerable Democrats. Kim Schreier, who's a Democrat from Washington State, Tammy Baldwin, who's a Democratic senator in Wisconsin. That's a battleground state there. And immediately, endorsing what President Biden has done here, because things were not going to look good for people who represent districts in states like that down ballot. Now you have what's going on the Republican side of the aisle, and this is really significant here, where you're starting to have people like Elise Stefanik, the Republican conference chair, Richard Hudson, the chair of the NRCC from North Carolina. Immediately, and we knew that this was going to happen, they're starting to say, look, if the president cannot run for re-election, then he ought to step down. How is he fit to serve?
Right.
And, we're going to have inquiries this week, Mike, into the shooting of former President Trump. There might be inquiries into this as to what the health of the president might be.
Chad, I covered former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi day in and day out with you for a decade. You've covered her for several decades. What about her role in terms of trying to convince President Biden it was time for a change and basically trying to protect her Democratic members?
Yeah, that was something that she was really worried about. And it was obvious, just not from Pelosi, but others who had a hand in this, that they had to address what was going to happen down ballot. And the idea was to start with a gentle push, and then it started to be more of a wave, and then it started to be a tidal wave, and then it was getting to maybe a tsunami. In fact, I think that we were probably going to have some of this last week had it not been for the shooting a week ago. It was a week ago Saturday that Chuck Schumer went to Rehoboth, did not announce this, and met with President Biden. And that statement, that just the fact that he had met, it came out seconds before the shooting. And so any conversation about this was kind of put off for about a week. And we've just gotten a statement here, Mike, from the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. He says Joe Biden has not only been a great president and a great legislative leader, but a truly amazing human being. Joe, today shows you are a great patriot and a great American. And, Democrats just saw no upside. And again, this was the amazing thing for weeks now on Capitol Hill since that debate. There was that meeting over at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee a week ago Thursday, where all the Democrats I talked to, nobody really wanted to say much. And they were saying, well, it's his decision and things like this. But we didn't get the sense from anybody that they were, I shouldn't say anybody, but very, very few, that they were really full bore behind Joe Biden, or they were doing it with a caveat. And that's where 2 weeks ago we had this conference call among House Democrats where many of them were starting to say very frank things and throw him under the bus and say, in the words of Don Beyer, he was feeble and they liked him, but he couldn't put two sentences together. Information from that leaked out, and then members had to dial it back because it was obvious this wasn't going as quickly as they thought it could go, Mike.
Chad, understandably, there's intense focus on the race for the White House, but the building you cover day in and day out, a third of the Senate is up for re-election with a tough map for Democrats, and the entire House of Representatives is on the ballot. So what about the balance of power? If we're looking at former President Trump returning to the White House, potentially, we'll see what the voters decide. But what about perhaps the argument from senior Democrats, which I've heard about being a check on a Trump presidency? What about that?
Yeah, that's something that they were very concerned about, losing, all three, the House, the Senate, and the White House. Holding the Senate is a tough battle to start with. That's going to be very challenging for the Democrats, no matter what. And that's why you had people like Sherrod Brown and John Tester coming out. Brown this Friday, but Tester a little bit earlier, saying, look, it's time for you to step aside, Mr. President. The House, they always thought that was within range, certainly because it was a narrow majority, but also because you had, they didn't think that the Republicans in the House were in utter turmoil at times. So they had trouble passing defense bills. They burned through two speakers, couldn't elect multiple people as speaker, trying all sorts of resolutions all the time. Democrats would always point to the loudest people in the room, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. You get the idea here. And so they're like, if we can't beat that, then, we're not doing anything right at all. And so that's where I think that this was kind of a salvaging process here. Now, does this salvage things? That's the question that people just don't know. Does it help? And, keep in mind that Democrats have been tarred by this for a while now, that you've had Republicans. I remember this early on when they started to talk about the border crisis. They said, they had appointed Vice President Harris as the border czar, and they had criticized and they had developed a library of information against her, saying she's not doing very good with the border. That is one of the primary 4 to 5 issues on the ballot this fall. And if Republicans can turn that around and say, well, you thought it was bad with Biden, it's really not going to be much better with the border czar, Vice President Harris, that's something that Democrats are very vulnerable on. Republicans can use against them. And one of the things that's going to be very, very important here, Mike, is who is she going to pick, if she's in fact the one, as her running mate? Is it going to be a moderate? Is it going to be somebody like Andy Beshear? Someone had put to me earlier today, maybe someone like Tim Ryan, the former congressman who lost to J.D. Vance from Northeast Ohio, and would match up very well with him on the stage there. Is that where maybe this is where maybe House and Senate Democrats weigh in more if the torch is in fact passed, fairly seamlessly to Vice President Harris? And I'm not saying that that's going to, be a done deal either here. That's something to look for if they have more of a say in who that person is. Is it Gretchen Whitmer? Do they want somebody from the Midwest? If it's going to be a woman, do they have to have a man? Do they want to have 2 minorities on the ticket? There's a million different ways to spin this right now.
We will.
So Fox News has some great reporters, and Chad Pergram is one of them.